I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Pauldcasty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one was so close to saying Pete Schrader on that.
I knew it.
The show is hosted by two guys. And one of the guys, my name is Jake Serwin.
I could see you entering some type of perfect focus zone in order to not say the wrong thing. I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. And should we just bring the guest in right away, Jake?
Let's bring our guest in. I have something gross to talk about, if that's okay. Our guest today is a writer on all things film. I would say, I hope this is okay to say, a titan of online film culture. Marya Gates, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you.
Hey,
I'm going to take that label now.
Okay, great.
I'm going to, every time I introduce myself,
shake
I'll say
hands with somebody.
titan of online film culture.
There you go. But like in a good way, like Godzilla. You know how he's like, he's our friend now.
Sure.
He's in the news lately. I don't know if you guys have seen that. So the listeners, if you've listened to one episode of this show, you'll have probably realized that I'm at least medium stupid. But I 2 days ago, I had sinus surgery. They went, doctor cut my septum up with like a little tiny knife, I guess, and did some other stuff. Put a balloon in there. And I said, what's the recovery time like? And they said, the downtime's about 24 hours. And I thought, okay, great. I'll be, it'll be as if nothing happened 24 hours later. I think what they meant and what I didn't realize is that, I was unconscious basically for about 24 hours.
Sure.
And if you can believe it, I somehow sounded worse until about 20 minutes ago when well, let's just say I've been rinsing some things out of myself with a special tool they gave me. So I'm feeling great. I'm feeling normal. I'm sounding so good. I feel like I sound like Maestro from Maestro, like in the later scenes where he's all coked out.
You don't sound like that. You're right. Yeah, I think it's appealing. And I think I texted you that I think it's period appropriate here.
Yeah. I mean, I sound like Robert Evans, like reading the
you don't sound that
kid's
bad.
face in the picture.
Don't be too hard on yourself here. Robert Evans sounds insane.
I went over to Charlie Bluto's house and I said, you got to read this.
That sounds like Robert Evans.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
go.
much. My greatest compliment. How are you doing? Did I ask you that?
You didn't, but that's nice of you to ask. Nothing nearly as dramatic happened in my week. Nobody took any major coagulated blood clots or mucus forms out of my head or anything. So I've been fine. I've been good.
And that explains some of your behavior.
They're still in there. Yeah.
And Marya, how are you?
I am pretty good. You know, we mentioned before we started recording that at the beginning of the week, my entire county had no internet for 3 days. So I was starting to go a little bit nutty because the cell service doesn't really work up here. It bounces off of 3 different satellites depending on what's working. And so sometimes I'll have like a bar and sometimes I'll have no service, SOS only. And
oh my God.
So I was like, what do I do as a terminally online person?
Right.
Like, I guess I could have read a book, but I did not do
You're
that.
in like 1979 mode up there.
Yeah, really.
You know, it occurs to me that that area that you're in, we used to be a Clint Eastwood podcast. Now we're a Paul Schrader podcast. Oh, yeah. And that area that you're in is kind of where a lot of Eastwood's Westerns were shot.
He actually used to have a ranch somewhere near up here.
Oh, you're right by the ranch.
Yes, because this is a crazy story. My godmother one time was driving in the rain with a bunch of baby goats, I think, in the back of her car. And there's a lot, always construction or like a boulder has come down the mountain. Things like that happen all the time. So all these cars were stopped and the CHP officer came up, was like telling everybody that like Clint Eastwood was a couple cars ahead if you wanted to meet him. And which I'm sure he was like happy about. But my godmother was like, no, I've got these goats. Like, I have too much. This is too much on to do. So then, like 10 minutes later, Clint Eastwood came and knocked on her door and was like, I just wanted to meet the person who didn't want to meet me. And she's like, you know what? You have to help me feed these goats now because they're awake and this is annoying. And so Clint Eastwood helped feed the goats of my godmother.
I love this.
Wow.
It's like it's like some kind of a riddle where like you have to deny the chance to meet Clint in order to meet Clint. When do you know when this was approximately?
I want to say this was the early 90s because I was alive when I heard this story.
Got it.
When like she told it to us when it happened. So
what's crazy about it is like I would believe that happened like a week ago. Like he's still out there feeding people's goats and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
But there's also I think some of the sequences in this film, especially we're talking about old boyfriends today. We'll get into it. Some of the sequences like when Talia Shire's character is driving to see Keith Carradine. I think she's driving through roughly the same area. There's some sort of Washington-looking parts of it.
I don't know where they filmed that. I should look that up.
They keep mentioning Minneapolis, but then it looks like Northern California mixed with like 5 Easy Pieces, Seattle-ish area.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not 100% sure, but certainly the hotel and all sorts of locations that are meant to be in Minneapolis were shot in Los Angeles. So I think
it does say they filmed some of it in Washington State also. So
there you go.
All right.
That tracks.
So I win the podcast. Let's just get right into our signature segment, the 2 questions. Mariah, were you able to come up with a question for us?
Yeah, this is a boring question, but it's my default question for everyone I interview. And this is not technically an interview, but it's close enough. And this is my bag. So I'm always curious what people's either favorite woman who is a director or favorite film directed by a woman is. So I wanted to ask that.
Extremely easy for me to answer because I think at least Jake and I spent a lot of the week reading Liberating Hollywood and enjoying it tremendously. And I was so excited to see and read all the discussion about Elaine May. And because, maybe kind of a cop-out, but Mikey and Nikki combines two just giants of cinema. And the way that she shot it, I think, is like totally singular and brilliant. It's very famous. People can go look up stories about how many hundreds, thousands of meters of film she shot. Something way over what was anticipated. And I think there's a story about her constantly having the camera running, and then one of the camera operators saw John Cassavetes and Peter Falk leave the set and went to turn the camera off, and she said, no, what are you doing? And he said, well, they're gone. And she said, yeah, but they might come back, which I think is really, really great. So
you have to check out Carrie's biography, Carrie Kerrigan's biography of Elaine May. I think it's Ms. May Does Not Exist. It's coming out in June.
Ooh, all right. I love it.
Very exciting. I love Elaine May. It's a great answer, Ian. I'm torn between 2 French directors because I love Celine Sciamma very much. I've loved all of her films. But she has only made, 4 or 5? And then I also love Agnes Varda, who has her beat
we love
considerably.
Varda here.
I think I got to go Varda because Varda also has the like a Schrader or an Eastwood. She's or a Herzog. She's a very memeable character. I feel like I mean, there's obviously the picture of her with Boo Berry. One of the cereal monster mascots. Okay. But Agnes Varda also just like endlessly quotable, just a fascinating figure. Her like artwork installations that she did also like really lovely. And she is a fellow cat freak like the 3 of us. So
the greatest cat filmmaker of all time, I think.
Gugu, I believe like the cat's name.
Her very first film, she had so many cats.
Yeah.
And she never stopped. She went hard for cats. I think the logo for her Cinemataurus is a cat, isn't it?
Yes,
so,
it is.
Amazing.
It is. What about you? Do you have a like? I'm sure that the answer changes minute to minute.
Yeah, I have a favorite. Can't say I have a favorite female director because there's too many that have too many films that I love. But my favorite film of all time is the 1994 version of Little Women, directed by Gillian Armstrong. Yep. I just love that movie. I don't necessarily love any other adaptation, nor do I like the book that much, but I love that film like deeply.
Interesting.
Deeply. So
Well, but what about when Bob Odenkirk shows up?
Okay. So this is a confession. Sorry, everyone who's gonna like throw me under a bus after this. I have actually not seen the Gerwig version because I don't like any other adaptation, and I don't really like Gerwig as a filmmaker.
Honestly, that's fair.
I was so I at some point when I think I have like 50 or like 45 Best Picture nominated films I haven't seen out of the like 600 or whatever it is. Once I get down to like the last 10, it's going to be like, that's going to be one of the last completest ones, I think.
See, this is one of the things that makes you a titan of film fanaticism. The numbers you're putting up, you're doing Michael Jordan numbers.
It's crazy. It's like, if you look at my Letterboxd, the top watched actors they're almost all from classic Hollywood, except for Denzel Washington
and stuff.
Yeah,
sure.
No, it's they're all in the 40s, so that's why Denzel Washington's one of the few like contemporary actors in there because he's made so many movies. But the number 2 or 3 on there is this guy is one of those directors or one of those actors that I didn't even know who it was until the Letterboxd calculated the stats. I was like,
right.
Oh, his name is Henry O'Neill.
Okay.
Yeah, Henry O'Neill.
Okay.
You would not. He's like that guy, but not in the Dick Miller style where you know who it is. He's just sort of one of those guys that's just always there. It's definitely, I'm like, and he's like 3 films away from dethroning Joan Crawford, and I'm not okay with that.
Wow.
I don't want him to dethrone Joan Crawford, but I only have a handful of hers left. I have like 5 Joan Crawford movies left and like 40 Henry O'Neill films left. I'm like, I can't. This is not going to go well for me.
It's so funny how that, like, yeah, I'm looking at, so for last year, which was the year that I watched every Clint Eastwood movie, more or less, my number 2 watched star was a guy named George Orison, who is just like a stunt double or something in Clint Eastwood movies.
Yeah, it's like the same with like directors. I only have 3 women in, even though I've seen thousands of films directed by women, but the handful of filmmakers who've made more than 20, my bottom one? My bottom one is Charlie Chaplin with 28 films. So the number of women who've made 29 films or more, including short films, limited. Is like limited. So it's Jennifer Reeder because she has a ton of short films. Varda, obviously, and I'm not finished with Varda. I still have a handful of hers left, and then Alice Guy Blaché, who made like 30-second.
Yeah, but they count. They count.
And then it's just a lot of dudes, and I feel really bad about that. But
I gotta tell you,
it's when you watch
all
old
the people
Hollywood,
online who should be feeling bad about not watching enough women, I'm not thinking of you. I will tell you.
Excused.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you for that one. I have a goofy one. Unless Ian, do you have a good question?
No, please, Jake. Okay. Go ahead.
All right, so taking the film's title in the sort of the wrong way, I'm wondering if either of you have ever had an experience with an old boyfriend that is like a grandmother or a great aunt or a woman of retirement age who begins dating and like brings an elderly boyfriend around to a family gathering or something.
I actually do have an answer to this.
Please.
I hope my friend whose life I'm going to mine doesn't listen to this, but her parents went through some issues when we were in high school, and they broke up, and they were on like their 3rd marriage anyways at this point. And we went to was it homecoming? I think it was homecoming. We went to homecoming, and we came home. So we were like 15, maybe. We came home from homecoming to her house. That's where I was supposed to stay the night. And her mom had packed up the house and left. And we were like, "Whoa, what?" And the note was that she moved to Idaho with her high school boyfriend's brother.
Whoa.
Wow. So
we were like, okay, what are we supposed to do now?
And you were there for that.
I was there for this. It was really intense. And her last 2 years, my friend's last 2 years of high school was a mixture of her dad's terrible girlfriends. And then eventually she came and lived with us because we had a stable home, and my brother went off to college, and so we had an extra bedroom and everything. But that was really intense, and
that's
I
crazy.
guess it worked out. Her mom was with that guy for like 10 years, so part of me is like, that's horrible, and part of me is like, well, if she was happy,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Jesus.
I don't know.
It must be
these
so
are kind of the
weird
questions of the film also. So this is a great experience.
They are.
Yeah.
Ian, what about you? You got any old boyfriends in your...
I do. Got to shout out the one and only my grandma, my grandmother Emily. She was married to my grandfather, and then their marriage ended, and she was with a guy for a long time who she did get married to. So he was the guy that I actually knew in my life as kind of my grandfather, Stan. And then she was dating another guy, Bob, for a long time. She was her boyfriend, although she didn't really like to have him called her boyfriend.
Right.
But not because of like feeling juvenile. She just like didn't want to make it so official. They were together for, I don't know, 15 years or something, 20 years, a long time.
They were casual for 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Love it.
And he just passed away not too long ago. So I'll also shout out Bob. And my grandma just turned 98 like 2 weeks ago.
Hey, happy birthday, Grandma Emily.
Yes.
No one show her how to listen to a podcast. Please spare her that.
Absolutely not.
She's earned it. So you've had like a whole string of them.
Yeah. And I think they're all secondary to my grandma's big personality. So I think
Sure.
I love that for her.
So I have two of these. My mom's dad died before I was born. So my mom's mom has been a single lady for my whole life, although there were a few old boyfriends, including one who was, I mean, I guess it was so casual or so I don't know. He was Mr. Weeks. His name was Mr. Weeks, which is very funny. Not even like Uncle whatever. He was just Mr. And then my stepmom's dad passed away a couple of years ago, and her mom, who is in her early 80s, has just started to kind of socially date, I believe, just kind of like to have something to do.
Sure.
And she's going out with men who are the same age, and she'll come home from the dates and be like, he's so old.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, I mean, you're like very youthful, but you're also 80 something. Like, of course he's old. Must be tough. I don't know. But shout out to all the old boyfriends out there.
Yes, big shout out.
Old guys taking pictures of themselves in the front seat of a truck with Oakley's on or whatever for Tinder. So that's the two questions. Mariah, what's your history with Paul Schrader, and specifically with this film?
Paul Schrader, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess like most people, I think Taxi Driver was the first Schrader related thing I saw when I was in high school, as you do. Which I didn't like it the first time I saw it. I was like 16-year-old girl just starting to like go beyond rom-coms. So yeah, that big opposite energy there. But I also actually, backing this up, Schrader wrote Bringing Out the Dead, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay, no, actually, I always forget this. And then I always remember this again. Bringing Out the Dead is the first one I saw. I rented that when I was 12 because I was in a really big, or maybe 13. I was in a really big Nicolas Cage fan in middle school. Nice. And as you are. And I guess I was 13 when it came out. So I must have been 13 or 14 actually when I rented it. But I rented that at 8mm and had a really dark Nicolas Cage double feature one Saturday. It was like, because my parents set it up. My parents set it up with the hometown rental store that no longer exists. But shout out to the erstwhile Top Hat Video, which turned me into the cinephile I am today. They set it up so I could rent like R-rated movies without them being there.
Oh, nice.
You had like a framed permission slip on the wall. I like it.
Yeah.
They didn't know that I was really going to use it as bleakly as I did. But so that's actually the first Schrader I saw, and I loved it. I actually think that movie's like underrated Scorsese film. Then I saw Taxi Driver, and then Old Boyfriends I didn't get to until that because it was so unavailable for so long.
Yeah.
And obviously I had seen Nashville and Thieves Like Us and her Tewkesbury's Altman films. But, I read that she directed a film, and I'm like, why is this not available? Yeah. And for a while there was like a crappy version on YouTube, but I didn't want to watch the crappy version. So I waited patiently. And then that restoration came around. And so I blind bought the Blu-ray because I was like, I know I'm going to like this. So, and I was right. I liked it. I've watched it several times. It's great Blu-ray, has lots of good special features. But I still haven't seen it like on the big screen. So it's one I would love to maybe, I guess, maybe this year. It's the 45th anniversary. Maybe it'll float around somewhere, but
Oh, yeah.
one can only hope.
It's a fascinating sort of rediscovery story. And I think like the kind of thing that
It still has like shitty reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. We need more people to review it positively. It should not. I think it's like a 50 something. And I'm like, I can see why some people don't like it, but it shouldn't be like a 50 something film. It should be in at least the high 60s, in my opinion, in terms of like split, like 60-40% people liking it feels more accurate to me.
Ian, had you seen this before?
No, I had not seen this before. And like Mariah, I was fascinated to hear about how this was rescued, how this film was sort of like brought back out of obscurity, because I think even Joan Tewkesbury talks about the YouTube version basically as like the one that was accessible.
That was it for a while.
Yeah. There's a great Q&A. So I guess we'll start in 2019. Let's set the stage.
Yep.
So Maya Montañez Smukler, who's a professor who wrote this book called Liberating Hollywood Women Directors in the Feminist Reform of 1970s American Cinema, which Ian and I are probably going to steal from borrow from liberally for our research for this episode. She writes this book about a list of women who directed films during New Hollywood, the sort of lauded like high point of American cinema as many people see it, and talks about like the difficulty that women had getting films made at this time when supposedly like anybody with an idea could show up and get money to make Chinatown or whatever. Yeah,
she talks about literally 16 women, and as she points out, giving her credit, 16 white women, as she observes why that's uniquely possible only for them. But it's really so, and several of them only make one film, so it's really focused. Including
Tewkesbury, who Joan Tewkesbury is from Redlands, California. She starts as a dancer. A lot of the women in this book, and when you study women in Hollywood, you tend to find more stories of sort of multidisciplinary artists or people kind of winding their way toward directing from another role rather than just like the kind of go to film school and make your first movie as a white dude sort of story. So she apparently is a very good dancer because at 18 she's Mary Martin's understudy for Peter Pan on Broadway. And then she goes to USC to study choreography and theater direction. And then she gets married to a Southern California land developer. So basically gets like the best suburban housewife setup you could.
Right.
And for those who don't know where Redlands is, that is the Inland Empire of David Lynch's Inland Empire.
Right. The famous Inland Empire. You take the 210 freeway until it ends.
And then you're in the desert and you might stab people.
Yes. It's a little...
Santa Ana winds.
Exactly.
You never know.
It's a great place to have a tattoo of the Monster Energy drink logo.
It'd also be extremely Christian simultaneously. I think.
And sunburned. Yep. It's quite warm out there.
Mm-hmm.
So she decides, I don't want this suburban housewife life as the Richard Jordan character's wife apparently did in this film, and she starts directing plays, and she ends up directing a play that stars Michael Murphy, the Robert Altman regular, and star of X-Men 3, X-Men The Last Stand, or whatever. I just watched it the other day, and I was like, Michael Murphy's in this? And Murphy brings Altman to a performance of the play right as he's about to make McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and Tewkesbury wants to get into film, and she asks him if she can come to the set and observe him, which is kind of insane because of all the Altman sets to come to observe, you want to go to the one that's like
the famously fraught,
somewhere even like more remote than where Mariah is now. Like it's also 1971, and he says. This is a quote from her, quoting him, "Nobody can observe. A person can't go on a movie set and observe. You'll observe nothing, and you'll be in the way, and you'll get nothing out of it. The only way is to have to work." And so she gets a job as the script supervisor on McCabe and Mrs. Miller. She gets like nagged into like an incredible opportunity. Yeah. Right. And she says that she was like the worst script supervisor of all time, which I think is wonderful.
And also I want to shout out our friends over at Altmania. I was thinking of them a lot for doing the research for this episode. It just seems like Bob is really comfortable just creating this family that he's known for having. And then also, as Tewkesbury pointed out, basically accidentally ruining the careers of a bunch of other people around him because he is so caustic and punches producers. And
he punched somebody from Columbia like on the set, which
and that ruined her first shot at a movie, basically, for Joan Tewkesbury. Yeah.
So she wants to direct, and he says she should write a script. So she does. She writes a script called After Ever After that's based on her own divorce. And Geraldine Chaplin is going to star in it, and Altman's going to produce it. And this is all kind of like handshake stuff. And then he asked her to collaborate on the script for Thieves Like Us, and she does. And then she writes Nashville, like she's the sole credited screenwriter on Nashville, one of the greatest films ever.
What an achievement! Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a huge critical success and a pretty big commercial success. And Altman says it's time to try to make After Ever After. And as Tewkesbury puts it, we couldn't raise 10 cents on Geraldine Chaplin. We couldn't raise 10 cents on me. At the end of Nashville, no studios were interested in a dark comedy about the end of my marriage, which is understandable. But at the same time, you contrast this with Alan Rudolph, who comes out of the Altman stable as well. He's like an assistant director and stuff. And in 1976, he directs his first feature, Welcome to L.A., which is produced by Altman and features Geraldine Chaplin. And then he makes like 20 movies.
Yeah, and 18 more movies after that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of varying quality. Some of them are quite well remembered, and some of them are not remembered at all. But you know,
But he got all those shots, is the point.
Right.
I think, right?
Exactly. And interestingly, through she's friends with Polly Platt, another unsung woman of New Hollywood.
Platt,
Yes, check out that great You Must Remember This series on Polly Platt. She was married to Peter Bogdanovich and also his like producing partner and sewed costumes herself.
The reason we have Wes Anderson. So
exactly, and so she's friends with Polly Platt, who introduces her to Jeff Berg, who is an agent who also represents Paul Schrader, who has written this script called Old Girlfriends with his brother Leonard, which they then, apparently for commercial reasons, gender swap to Old Boyfriends. One of those brief moments where it seems like, you know, it's like when after Black Panther came out, there was an announcement that Spike Lee was making a movie based on the like one-time Spider-Man character who is like a black skateboarding Spider-Man or something.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it just disappears. But it was like one of those afternoons where they're like, we're making movies about women. And so they flip it to Old Boyfriends. And as Tewkesbury puts it, Jeff Berg basically blackmailed Edward R. Pressman, the producer of this film, into letting her direct it because he wanted to be in the Paul Schrader business so badly that he would let Joan Tewkesbury make a movie. And she apparently did a lot of uncredited rewrites, as you might imagine, because she was like most famous as a writer at this point. So it's very bizarre and fascinating to have her only like feature film as a director be a movie written by such a like a distinct voice as a writer. And you obviously you get some of that in the movie. Like there's diary voiceover.
Yeah, there's a lot of Schraderisms in this.
Oh, yeah.
There are. But then it also, like, what's so fascinating to me is that the movie seems to be in tension between Schrader and Tewkesbury and David Shire as well. Like, the score is almost like, it's very sort of, it feels kind of ironic. Like, it seems like the score was borrowed from another movie or is setting you up to think that the score is from a movie where Talia Shire has a knife. You know?
Yeah.
Which is also what it sounds like Paul Schrader was envisioning, a movie where Talia Shire has a knife for most of the movie. And I think Joan Tewkesbury says that there's a couple different characterizations. We're going to read how Paul Schrader recalls what happened here. But Tewkesbury says Schrader just wanted to make a straight horror movie, and it's basically a movie with one of his like freaky deaky guys that he loves to make movies about. And she wanted to do something a little bit more grounded in realism.
Well, he decided it was going to be a freaky deaky gal instead. Yeah. And I did have a question for the panel, because this comes out in 79. Let's see, April 13th, 1979, about 2 months after Hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
And another film that comes out in 1979 starring one of the stars of Blue Collar, of course, is Alien, which was famously written gender blind. Like the characters did not have genders in the script. And I wonder, Mariah, how you feel about, and Ian, to a lesser extent, I do wonder how you feel about this, but not nearly as much.
It's okay.
Like that process of writing a character, and I think generally you're probably going to get more men doing this, but writing a character just as sort of a person without taking like the experience of living as a man or a woman or a non-binary person into account. Like, how does that sit with you?
I think that tends to be, I'm going to generalize, but it tends to be something that cis white men do, straight white men do, because they think there is such a thing as a blank human.
Right.
Because they've never had to, for the most part, unless they were born in poverty or something, had to sort of burst against anything. Like they've never felt othered. They've never, had their experience and their identity markers either go against them or anything like that. Right. So this idea that there is a blank human is something they can write, right? Because they're just like, well, they'll just remove everything. And it's like, that's
yeah.
Even as themselves, that's not true. They're not a blank human themselves either. So I always find that fascinating because I don't think it's real. Like it's not like not to quote Kanye West because he's horrible, but it's like, that doesn't make sense. You know that quote where he's like, that doesn't make sense. I'm Kanye West. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Like it's never made sense to me. I don't understand it. I'll never understand it.
Right.
Because so much of those factors, just because of the fact that we live in a society, those factors are going to either hinder you or help you, or at the minimum, steer how you are going through the world. And to not think about that when you're creating a character just feels like the opposite of the whole point of creating a character and seeing the world through someone's lens. Which is why this character I find really fascinating because, and I've read a ton of contemporary reviews where they're like, I don't understand why she's doing anything she's doing. And I've watched it a few times now. And there are moments where I don't understand what she's doing. And I'm like, does this feel like a woman would do this? And then there are other moments where I'm like, no, I completely understand everything she's doing. Especially the Belushi section, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Right.
That's the section for them that I understand, I think, the most deeply.
Yeah.
It truly feels like something, if you're like, something has twitched in your head and you're like, I'm in revenge mode, like, who hurt me emotionally, I'm going to hurt them too. I understand that. And not that I've ever done that, but I understand the desire to want to do that. And so I don't know, it's fascinating. And you brought up Alien too, which I think a lot of what is gendered in that is how they film Ripley, which I actually was on the Alien Minute podcast forever ago, back when I lived in Atlanta. So I don't even know what year that was. Talking about some of the sequences towards the end where they film her in such a way that I think they were trying to be gender neutral because they're all in their under or whatever, but it's still, it's kind of gross how they film her.
Crazy.
And I'm like, just by the fact that it's Sigourney Weaver in her underwear, the way you filmed it has now made it gross. Whereas if it had been any of the guys in that same costume, it might not have been gross. So you have to think about that. You not thinking about it made it worse, in my opinion, with Alien.
Yeah, that's part of the problem of decontextualization, right? The sort of like gender blindness is to imagine that an experience for a woman or a femme person would be identical just by the nature of like the details of the experience itself, being attacked by a mutant alien on a spaceship to just, or, like you're saying, being in your underwear for a movie going audience is not going to be treated the same. So that's not to say there aren't shared experiences, of course. I think I would also critique Paul Schrader seemingly when it seems like he's writing towards like a really stereotypical vision of like, this is like what a woman's experience of the world would be like or something, right? And I think that also has its own travails, but yes, it certainly seems like you're better off at least trying to conceive of the specifics of how a person would walk through an experience.
Yeah, I think what for me is like, it's the next step. Like if you want to start quote unquote blank, sure, right? Write the situation.
Yeah.
Once you've inserted the character and you've decided or you've cast it or whatever, then you there's one more step of, okay, well, now that we've cast so-and-so and they are such and such. What is that experience? How does that change the experience? And I feel like a lot of, even today, some films will start neutral, do the casting, and then they don't factor in the casting. And then you've got characters of a certain race or of a certain gender expression or whatever doing things that, for the most part, probably wouldn't do that.
Right.
Once you actually think, well, how did this person get raised? How would that then affect how they act in certain situations? You have to do those steps. And I think in this one, Tewkesbury is able to bring in shades of that for sure.
Yeah, and just in case we think that Paul Schrader's not totally aware of this problem, in Blue Collar, there's a character who says, Richard Pryor's character effectively says, you and I are in similar situations, except guess what? I'm black, and that means I'm experiencing this differently. So why would that be the same for you and I?
Schrader also talks in a lot of the interviews he's given about that film. He wrote it as the sort of three leads are two black men and a white man, and so many studio guys said, can it be two white guys and a black guy? And he pushed back on that because he didn't want the one black character to have to be representative of the entire experience of being a black auto worker.
Which is good,
but also reveals that the man knows a little more. Like he can't plead ignorance. Not that he ever has, but let's talk about the movie a little bit, because one of the things that I was trying to track throughout the film was how could this have just been gender swapped from whatever that original version was, or does this seem whole cloth?
If it got gender swapped, like if it was a man doing this to women, it would be such a creepy movie. I mean, it's already kind of creepy because she's sort of she's slowly going back, regressing emotionally.
Right.
And so her behavior is getting worse and worse. If a man was doing that to women, it would... I don't think I would like the movie. I would find it really icky. And I don't know what that says about me, because it's still kind of icky, especially at the end. The last thing that she does, or the penultimate sequence, is incredibly murky ethically. But I don't know, something about a man doing that, it would be even worse. I don't know.
Well, I do want to talk about Broken Flowers at some point also, which is I think brought up a lot as the kind of
natural double feature.
Exactly. But do we want to do like a 30-second summary of the whole thing? Sometimes we get excited and we jump around a little bit, but I think this is probably a movie that lots of our audience has not seen. I think they should go see it absolutely, like, right away. But
yeah, it's great. I think it was on Canopy.
It's on Canopy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm not in the same state as my Blu-ray right now, so I rewatched it on Canopy, and it is still there.
Perfect.
Oh, no, I rewatched it. No, it fell off Canopy. Let's go backwards. It's no longer on Canopy. I had to watch it on Peacock.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Things.
It's available, and especially compared to, being having to like track down a VHS or watch it in terrible quality on YouTube.
But I recommend getting the Blu-ray, like I said earlier. It's one of the great packages, lots of special features.
It's really terrific. Good. So the film Old Boyfriends, it is about a woman named Diane Cruz, played by Talia Shire. By the way, happy birthday to her brother, Francis Ford Coppola, today as we record this. Whatever.
What can you say about Coppola? There's too much.
Yeah, looking forward to Megalopolis. She plays a woman named Diane Cruz, who, for fairly mysterious reasons, it goes on a road trip to reconnect with three of her former boyfriends after something seems to have happened with her relationship in her life. She kind of drops out of her life in LA and goes to see first her college boyfriend Jeff, played by Richard Jordan, who he proposed to her a few times, and they think about rekindling things, and then she takes off and finds Eric Katz, who was a high school maybe boyfriend who humiliated her by lying about her basically being like easy, slut-shamed her and sort of destroyed her reputation at school. He's played by John Belushi, and he's kind of a loser. He's like a Blues Brother if like that was played for
in real
like
life.
how people would really react to a Blues Brother.
Yeah.
And she kind of she gets him back by humiliating him in ways that we'll get into. And then finally, while this is happening, Richard Jordan's character, Jeff, is trying to track her down because he's concerned about her and also kind of wants to put things back together. So he hires a private detective, Buck Henry.
The best private detective of all time. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then she goes looking for her elementary school boyfriend, who, what was his name?
Louis
Van Thiel.
And he's died in Vietnam.
We got a Dutch name. We got the Paul Schrader Dutch name.
That's true.
She goes to looking for him and finds his younger brother, Wayne, played by Keith Carradine, who is in a state of sort of arrested development and emotional shock from the death of his brother. And she takes some very ill-advised kind of hands-on psychological tactics to, I guess, try to help him or just help herself. Everyone gets mad at her, and she returns home to what is probably an extraordinarily expensive apartment on Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica. And Richard Jordan is waiting there, and they reunite. The end of Old Boyfriends. And that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Mariah, for coming on. But let's start at the beginning. As a first feature, this movie really starts with some very strong directorial moves. It has this. It's got some European flavor to my mind.
Does. And this was a recut. This is a decision that was made after the majority of the film was shot. And I didn't get a chance to see either the original Old Boyfriends or Old Girlfriend script or the Old Boyfriend script. But
hard to track down.
Yeah, based on what Joan Tewkesbury said in an interview or a live screening of this at UCLA, she talked about how they basically shot the whole movie and realized, to your points, Mariah, that and something that people were weirdly objecting to at the time, that it wasn't clear what type of state she was in emotionally, or what her background was, the sort of setting for all this. So they add this scene where she tries to kill herself, but we never see the Talia Shire character, right? We just see the outside of her car. It's an overhead
shot of a car. Yeah. By the way, the editing was by William H. Reynolds, who somewhat successful as an editor, worked on films like The Sound of Music and The Godfather and The Sting. And also Ishtar, Elaine May's Ishtar, which is a good movie. That's the official position of this podcast. A straight up good movie.
Yep.
Yeah. Great film.
We don't have to get into it here too much. I did want to talk about Michael Cimino for just a second because...
Okay. Well, you mean you want to return to Michael Cimino?
Yes. Bill Reynolds, he produced and also edited Heaven's Gate. So he was the executive producer of on Heaven's Gate. We didn't talk about this. There is based on a book that came out after Cimino's death, there is some discussion that Cimino lived the last few decades of their, in relative seclusion as a woman. And I did not discover this when we talked about Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. And this does actually get into kind of confusing territory, because if Cimino never publicly declared their gender, do we consider
is that just speculation?
Films by a femme person, or is this speculation? How just trying to be respectful of someone's wishes. It's difficult because on the one hand you want to celebrate somebody's identity if they weren't able to express it during their lifetime, but also if that's hearsay, I don't want to put something on somebody that they don't want put on them. So I'm raising this only to say we didn't talk about it on Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and mercifully it is not the subject of this episode, so we don't have to get into it. But it's thorny, and that's the sort of thing that I don't know, that gets complicated when we're talking about.
That's why repression is bad.
Yes,
because
right.
If they could have lived, if they were. Which we don't know. It's unconfirmed. Even in the 70s and 80s, this sounds like we're talking about someone who's making movies in the 30s or something, right?
Yeah.
But no, this is the 70s and 80s they died, 10 years ago?
Yeah. I think Cimino's last movie was 1996 or something.
Yeah. So it's someone wasn't comfortable one way or the other in the 90s is that's horrible. So, I think the murkiness just highlights for me the fact that it's taken a long, long time for us to get to a place where we have so many trans and non-binary filmmakers. And even then it's so small, the ones that their films are actually talked about on a large,
Yes.
But someone could potentially now, maybe, hopefully, direct a Best Picture.
Yeah.
And be open and out about who they are.
Exactly. And then there's individual experiences of that. Like there was, I think in some promo recently, Hunter Schafer was talking about how she doesn't want to have to play trans roles. She just wants to play female roles. And like, I'm not interested in doing that anymore, which is like a 100% valid position. And the frustrating thing is when there's like 3 people who are allowed to be trans on screen, then you get siloed into these categories. It's all screwed up, which is why things like this book by Maya Smukler and your A Year with Women project, Mariah, are like,
and I want to shout out Caden and Willow's book on trans cinema that's coming out also in June.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about this one.
Was it Corpses, Fools, and Monsters? Corpses. It's got a title, but you can find it. Caden Gardner, Willow McClay, their book is going to be amazing too. And I think because they wrote it kind of independently, it's going to be like there's no publisher interference in terms of how they're talking about what they're talking about.
Hell
so
yeah.
I think that's going to be a landmark book comes out.
We're living in a very exciting time for like new voices previously unheard talking about film history. Anyway, back to the opening shot of the movie.
Yeah.
It's a classic episode of Podcasting for me so far. So then we find Diane Cruz on the way to Richard Jordan's film set. The music kicks in, and I'm surprised. I was not expecting this kind of score.
I didn't want to throw you off your rhythm earlier, but I enjoyed the David Shag. This is Talia Shire's husband. I liked the score
for like another 6 months after this movie comes out.
Schwartzman,
right?
Father,
yes,
baby daddy,
Jack Schwartzman, John Schwartzman, something like that. Yeah. And that's another weird thing about women in Hollywood, where like if you get famous while you're married to somebody, you have somebody else's name, and then the relationship ends. Like often you kind of just stick with the name.
Yeah, like Angie Dickinson,
or Paul Schrader's wife, Mary Beth Hurt, has the last name of William Hurt, who she was married to prior.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So the score, the reason that I use the term European is because I just get this kind of like intentionally distancing, sort of a challenging and like forcing you to try to get your bearings experience of first you have the whose car was that?
Yep.
What's going on with this score?
Bunch of diminished and major 7th, minor 7th chords to sort of unsettle you. And then I think that's what Tewkesbury is talking about, though. That seemingly was her intention in not trying to create like a universal woman, but to immediately set it up as like, this is a specific woman in a specific scenario who shouldn't necessarily like project your identity onto, right? This is not going to be like an every woman type of a movie necessarily.
Yes. And in the there's a great discussion between Professor Smukler and KJ Relth, who's now KJ Relth Miller, and the director of programming at the Academy Museum, but was at the time programming for UCLA. There's a great kind of conversation about this series that this film was part of, where Smukler calls it part of this new woman film genre, which is sort of like coming after the sort of women's lib, the discussions of women's liberation in culture, like movies about what does a woman's life look like, what kind of roles should women lead, or like the challenge of figuring out what kind of person you want to be. Like,
this was coming out around when like An Unmarried Woman,
exactly.
Girlfriends, Turning
Yep.
Point. Even Kramer versus Kramer, the Meryl Streep character, that's a whole factor there. Yeah.
Yeah. I just watched Girlfriends last night. Really loved it. Like
Girlfriends is so good.
It is so good. Yeah.
Claudia Wells
and
I have the old Warner Archive DVD and the Criterion Blu-ray. I have a completist.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Don't blame
I was
you.
very surprised to see a friend of the show, Eli Wallach, show up in Girlfriends.
As the hot rabbi,
the hot rabbi. Yep.
Perfect casting.
Yeah. Just as a support for the film, in case you're unfamiliar with it, not famously, well, questionably a champion of women, Stanley Kubrick, I guess in an interview I discovered, said that somebody asked him, like, are there any films you're excited about from Hollywood? And he's like, I saw this Claudia, there's like one. He's like, I saw a Claudia Weil film.
Yeah,
and
he goes on about it for like a while too.
Yeah, it's like, this is like the only thing that is interesting. And he and I think Professor Smukler sort of coincide in seemingly saying that what is maybe allowing for this moment, and we'll get into it, but are like material changes that allow just for more people to produce and direct and distribute films in different ways. Like more than anything else, that's what is more than studios saying like women's pictures are the big next thing. It's these like streams of filmmaking that are allowing people to open doors a little bit better.
So she comes upon Richard Jordan, who we've previously seen in the Yakuza, the first film we talked about here.
And to bring it to David Lynch, Dune.
Exactly.
The only Dune that exists in my heart.
There you go. Yeah. The original Jason Momoa. So he's like a commercial director or something.
He claims he's a documentary director, but he makes industrial films.
Yeah, he's directing it seems like a political advertisement for it seems like a conservative candidate or something, but then it also seems like it's fake. No,
I mean, seemingly this again, the guy shooting it is like an actor, like a small time actor, and there's some discussion of environmental protection in there, so I don't know for sure, but he's very self-deprecating and sort of says like, yeah, I made a film that millions of people watched. I made it for Texaco.
Yeah.
So at first he doesn't recognize her, and then they kind of have some they catch up and they flirt, and they end up like enjoying this affair that quickly becomes like, maybe we're gonna put things together. She tells him that her husband has killed himself, and his wife ran off. He suggests, maybe jokingly, that it was after like reading a book about the new woman. Like he suggests that maybe she sort of
so like semi-ironically. So he says like even worse than that. I think he says like she read an article in a woman's magazine or something.
Right,
and I think,
that's what it was.
It's really disparaging.
It is, which I think I like this character a lot, but he seems to be an interesting mix of like a not totally toxic form of masculinity, where he's been forced into a role where he is the single parent to his daughter, but he also falls back. Mother, that's what I was about to say. He falls back and was like
the working mother,
kind of questionably reaffirming of gender roles jokes and stuff, because he just doesn't know how to conceive of himself, seems like.
I also wanted to point out real quick, just as like a pop-up video, the guy who plays the fisherman in the commercial is Beef from Phantom of the Paradise, people who have seen the greatest glam rock musical of all time.
Well, we just had a De Palma episode.
Right. Yeah, we were just talking about Obsession, and Edward Pressman, who produced this movie, also produced the first couple De Palmas. But
there's this is one of those Venn diagram movies of. It is her one directorial film, but it touches so many other filmographies. It's wild.
70s, man.
Several connections to Street Fighter, the movie.
Good time. And later in the film, PJ Souls from Rock and Roll High School shows up.
Rock and Roll High School.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Love PJ Souls. If you don't like PJ Souls, turn off the show.
Who are you?
Yeah. Podcast right now. We also get the introduction of his daughter, Dylan, who is played by Richard Jordan's real life daughter, Nina Jordan, which is cute. And they have I think very clear, natural fondness for each other. Like the chemistry is great.
I think all three of them have wonderful chemistry. I think this to me is like maybe the peak. I also like the Belushi chapter a lot.
Oh, I read one review. I forget who it was now. From when this was released, that basically said they wish the movie was just a deeper exploration of that relationship. And I part of me is like, okay, I get that. That's a whole other movie, though.
Yeah, it is a totally different movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this section is so successful, and so is the Belushi. And I think they're like a study in contrast. So I would keep both those. The last section is the one where it gets a little bit muddy.
Very, very weird.
But so what happens?
This is so Nina wants Diane to cut her hair to look like Diane's, which I think is a very sweet and clever way of sort of indicating that she's like, this is a cool new type of woman that I want to be, you know?
Yeah.
There's also that weird shot at the beginning with the wig, which sort of sets it up to be Talia Shire has like this
little
wig on her
model
desk.
of a head. I forgot this.
Yeah,
part.
which just it just sets it up like it's gonna be some kind of revenge movie where she's gonna put on a bunch of disguises to like kill somebody, and that her hair changes, but it's never really to like deceive particularly. It's not like she goes like alias mode or something. It's very weird. So she kind of Western style just sort of ups and leaves, which was, this is the part that feels like the most like it could have been just gender swapped, and was like a surprising and fascinating thing to see happen in a movie where the woman blows into town and kind of a man falls in love with her, and then she rides on out of town, and he has to stay behind because he's put down roots there. It's sort of the opposite of like a Shane type situation.
Well, we haven't discussed what is her stated purpose in all this, which is she says that she doesn't really know who she is, and by going
she's trying
back
to find herself.
Yeah, she wants to see the people who knew her at different periods in her life, and by finding out who she was in those moments, she'll discover who she is now. And I think from the beginning, that's framed as like a realistic desire, something we might all think about, but also extremely misguided. I don't think there's a point where the film is saying like, this is a great idea to actually find psychological stability through other people.
Yeah.
It's also really fascinating, and I don't know if this was in conversation with these films or not, but earlier in the 70s, there's a film called Janie's Janie that this filmmaking collective called, I think they're called like Newsreel, I want to say. It's on Criterion Channel. If I'm assuming people who are listening to this podcast probably have Criterion Channel.
Probably,
but if you don't, you should. But it's a 50-minute maybe documentary about this woman who is a single mom, and she talks about how she's telling her own story about how she originally was her father's Janie, and then she was her husband's Janie, and now that she is divorced and raising her kids and figuring out who she is on her own, she's Janie's Janie. That's the title. And I think this is kind of the opposite of that, in that she hasn't figured out who Diane's Diane is. So she's looking at, who is Jeff's Diane, who was Eric's Diane, and who was Lewis's Diane, and who, but by going backwards and reverting backwards, I think it shows that maybe that's not, that there's a reason you go from being, the kid version to the college version to the adult version. And hopefully you have gone through that journey in the correct direction. And she's trying to go reverse engineer that journey, and with very disastrous results.
Throughout the movie, one of the most impressive visual things about the movie, and it looks incredible. And I'm so glad that there's a Blu-ray of it, and they found like an original negative and with color timing notes and all. They really got to give it the best look they could. There's so many great shots of mirrors, and Diane is always reflected, not necessarily to herself sometimes, but also just reflected to us. Like there's a crazy shot when she's at Richard Jordan's character's house where she's talking to him, and we see her face in like a sort of a close-up mirror, and his face in the bigger, the makeup mirror,
or the zit mirror, or whatever.
Yes,
however you use it.
I call it the self-harm mirror.
But you should not see your pores, that big mirror.
Yeah, don't pick that yet. But she's often like reflected and refracted, and I think this is like a great way to sort of illustrate how she's considering herself throughout the movie. And we should say it's shot by William Fraker, who, great cinematographer, shot Street Fighter the movie, which was also produced by Everett Pressman, who appears in it as well. But Fraker shot a million things, and also he sort of trained Bobby Bird, who was a frequent Schrader collaborator also. So like they're all overlapping, and he directed the movie A Reflection of Fear, starring Sandra Locke.
Okay, all right.
Connected.
My red yarn is getting all twisted up.
It actually makes sense, and it's normal. As a quick aside, that's another Tewkesbury decision, because in the Schrader brothers, we should say, script, those mirror reflections all show her as a girl, a child. And
Oh, I don't like that. Like a reverse obsession.
It's like two
I was about to say,
also,
exactly. We know that Schrader's interested in this because he did the same thing in reverse in Obsession, like Jake's saying. But
Mariah, have you seen Brian De Palma's Obsession?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to look at Letterboxd.
You get around
I really
to it.
don't think I have.
It's like a Vertigo riff, but with a mother and daughter.
Yeah, that feels like I haven't seen it.
Okay.
I
mean, put it at the end of the list. Yeah.
Oh, no, I did see this. Wow. Okay. I gave it 3 stars. Apparently, that's why. Things with 3 stars are the movies that are like, they were very neutral on me. Yep. If it's like 2 stars or below, I remember why I hated it. If it's like 3.5 and above, I remember why I liked it. If it's 3 stars, I'm like, I watched it.
yeah. It's like a Subway sandwich.
I also fully forgot that I had watched most of it within like a year, so you're in good company.
Okay. Also, I watched it in March of 2011, which was the month I watched like 200 movies. That was a bad month. I mean, it was a good month. Obviously, I didn't leave the house for like the whole month.
Sounds great.
Cramming movies in there.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say So Tewkesbury shot all that stuff, and then I think with more restraint and wisdom than Schrader had, she said, "This is insane, so over the top."
Do you know if that was the actress who reads some of the diary voiceover? Because there's some of the voiceover
there's 2.
is
There are 2, and one of them is Tewkesbury's daughter. Yeah.
Okay, but was that the actress that they shot the inserts with?
I don't know that for sure. But to get back to Mariah's other point, I do think that this film is in conversation with so much of feminist literature and art, not just in this sort of second wave era, but going back to like a Awakening, Kate Chopin style stuff, where it's the exact same question, right? Of a woman who has only ever understood herself as a child of a man mostly, and then a partner to a man, trying to figure that out, and then like we brought up, girlfriends, similar thing where. Right. One woman continues that pattern of sort of defining herself in relation to other people, and one woman doesn't, and neither of them are super happy, right? I don't think the film has any illusions about saying this is a process that will always lead to perfectly blissful liberation or something, which is, I think, something that only men try to characterize feminist films as, like, not recognizing the nuance or the difficulty of a discovery process or the possibility of failure. I think when they make these films, they make it very clear, like, well, just because we have opportunities or the possibility of psychological discovery, it's not going to be like a dream.
It's that forever. It's a truism that feels like a cliche, but it's like often men are looking towards a result. And women tend to be more process oriented, or just when women are having a bad time, they don't necessarily want. And they want to rant, right? They don't necessarily want a solution. They just need to do the ranting. And I think that's a similar thing, is like these movies are about going through the process, not necessarily getting to the end.
Yes. Right.
Because anyone who's lived through anything knows there is no end until you're dead. Until you're dead. It's always a process. Or a coma, I guess.
Yes. Sure. There you go. We can only hope. One of the things I liked so much about this movie is that the Shire character is like a different person to each of these people from different points in her life, which is something that I unfortunately relate to. But like, she is not sure who she is. And so she kind of has all of these different like personalities that she kind of tries on, or that she maybe returns to from a previous point in her life, or maybe she brings now Diane to interact with the high school Eric, who's literally like stuck in high school, and invites her to a high school dance that his band is playing.
Yeah, I think Richard Jordan's character kind of voices this nicely, where Talia Shire is maybe playing with the idea, maybe doesn't really want to do this, but plays with the idea of just re-sparking the relationship. And he says, that's impossible. We are people who have lived 10 more years of our lives. Right. And it's insane to imagine that hasn't affected who we are, and that we could somehow just return to this other version of ourselves. Which is not to say that people don't. Go ahead.
Oh, no, continue. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, which is not to say that people don't carry whatever trauma or prior experiences with them, these other versions as a part of themselves. But I think any mature person can recognize that, 10 more years of experiences hopefully means that you've changed somehow for better or for worse.
Yeah. And what I think was kind of interesting in each of the three situations is they ended in ways in which she didn't have control, kind of, except for the college one. The college one, she had the control to say no multiple times. So she's trying like, well, what if I don't say no? Right.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yep.
Well, how does this work out? Then with Eric, it's like she didn't have the control in that situation. He took it by spinning a yarn. So what happens when she takes control? Kind of, some comeuppance for him, but it's still really nasty. And I don't know if she feels great afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, that's the bigger takeaway.
Yeah. And then with Lewis, which then ends up being his brother instead, that ended because her family moved. And so now it's like, well, what would have happened if she hadn't moved and she'd gotten to have that first like blush of sexuality with a kid who was actually nice to her.
Right.
But then obviously because that's not, she wasn't able to follow through with that as she had intended. It's a really interesting way of literalizing what ifs that I think everyone does. But instead of playing it out in her head, she's like, okay, well, I'm going to play out this what if. And I think that that's part of what makes the film kind of revolutionary is there weren't really many films where women got to have that kind of agency of going back.
Yeah.
You start to see more of that in the 80s. Like I'm thinking of Peggy Sue Got Married is another one where she like fantastically literally goes back and uses her adult knowledge to try to change things. But there's plenty of stories about men going back in time and doing things like that, and men try hitting middle age and going, I'm going to go find what if I did this differently. But this is she's kind of literalizing the freedom that women are finding in the late 70s. More women, not all women, obviously, like white women for the most part, had a lot of more economic freedom to like she can just leave her job. She'll probably get another job. It's fine.
Yes.
And she's divorced in California, which is maybe divorced in California, which is a no fault state. So it's split half and half. So she's not even in a place where economically starting over is going to negatively affect her too much. And it's just really touching on so many different factors of new freedoms for certain women in the United States at this era, but doing it in a really creepy way, which is also like, I still don't know how I feel about it. Like, I don't know if it's like, yay, this is great freedom, or if it's like, freedom is terrifying. Like, I don't know what it's saying. I don't know. But again, I think your point that this is a specific woman. So like maybe it's not saying one way or the other. It's just saying this woman took these freedoms and did this.
That's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
I don't know.
I have only like a theoretical horse in this race. I think it's nice for everybody to have liberation, but I'm some fucking guy. But I like that she gets to kind of fuck up. Like, I think I find it liberating and I find it relatable, and I think it's it's very frustrating when characters who are meant to represent underrepresented groups then have to be like paragons of virtue, because that's boring and unfair, and like people don't like Superman as much as they like I don't know, Batman, who's like a complicated guy.
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. There you go. So I like that she's kind of a creep. I mean, maybe that's just representation is important and we need to see more creeps on screen. But
no, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, there's this sense that I think in lots of liberatory struggles that immediately becomes this conservative or reactionary response when people aren't happy, is to say like, well, see, this is a bad idea. These women who are now getting no-fault divorces, or they are able to pursue a career. Some of them aren't happy. Doesn't that show you that they should have just been obligatory mothers and wives? And I think it's much more interesting artistically and politically to say, no, it's not about, like you were saying, right, a results-oriented politics, right? It's a politics of saying what we want is for people to have these opportunities and to engage in, like you're saying, misguided ideas that men have about going back in time and learning that maybe that's not possible or not productive, and that should still be something that's available and interesting. And then hopefully, of course, we would like to see some people have net positive improvements in their lives. Obviously, that's
Right.
also part of liberatory politics,
I
but
mean,
not
it
always.
seems like not to jump too far ahead, but it seems like PJ's Souls with Diane's ex-husband. She's having a good time.
Yeah,
like
yep.
she
By
figured
the
it out.
pool. Yeah.
Exactly.
Are they actually divorced or not? We don't know.
We don't know.
Uh-huh.
Is she like the other woman? Maybe, but she's not judged for it. She's clearly living her life.
At this point in the film, we still think he killed himself. As
Yeah.
far as we know. Should we jump to Belushi?
Belushi, yeah.
Now,
Cats.
I had an interesting experience where I guess I misread the box or something, and so I'm expecting Jim Belushi.
Big Jim.
wow.
Okay.
And I had
Mm.
kind of a reverse "is Pepsi okay" experience
Okay.
where
Is
look,
Coke
I don't,
okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, of course. Not for John Belushi, unfortunately. But sorry, I'm thinking about
Too soon.
Jim Belushi around this time is in Thief and is a perfectly
Destroys it.
welcome
Yeah.
character
Shout
actor
out.
in that film. But to be expecting Jim and to find yourself with John is a lovely thing. However, John Belushi is extraordinarily unlikable in this film in a very successful portrayal. We first have this absolutely gobsmacking red hotel room.
The
Yes.
greatest.
I wanted to take a quick detour here, Mariah, to talk to you about, because I learned that you were basically like the GIF person for Filmstruck.
Yes, I'm also the gift person for Criterion at the moment. So if you ever
Oh,
see,
hell yeah.
they don't put any
Insane.
logos on them, but if you ever see gifts on the Criterion socials, that's me. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
it's like finding out that like
It's my secret, or probably my biggest contribution to the internet is the number of GIFs and screenshots that originated from me somewhere. I see my screenshots that don't have any, like, I only know they're my screenshots because I know exactly what frame I took out in the wild 10 years later. And I'm like, I love that that's still out
you're
there.
like Johnny Appleseed or something.
You, that's
just
a great way to put,
planted.
you never know what's going to reach the masses.
You know what?
Beautiful.
One of my biggest contributions to the internet that nobody knows about, but I think it fits with this
Please,
conversation here.
Yeah, toot your own horn.
Is have you seen this photo of Shelley Duvall on Brewster McCloud eating cotton candy?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, if it existed, there was only like low res versions on the internet. I used to run the Tumblr for Warner Archive collection.
Ooh, okay.
And I had access to any image that had been digitized from the Warner Brothers library. So I spent, countless hours like, what is in here that has never been on the internet? Can I put it out on the internet? Because I was advertising the streaming service like with this photo. That was the logic I used to let them give it to me, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So those beautiful high-res photos are on the internet because I pulled them from this horrible old system on the Warner Brothers server and put them on
Holy shit.
Tumblr. So you're welcome, everybody. That was about 10 years ago.
I'm looking. Someone has hand painted this, like photoreal hand painted this.
It's an amazing photo with her eyelashes and everything. I was like, this needs to be on the internet immediately. So
this is your equivalent of rescuing a prince of old boyfriends. You've been out there doing this work.
Yeah,
I love it.
I've put a lot of stuff out on the internet.
This is what I wanted to talk about because I feel like online film culture, especially of the kind of Tumblr and then into like Twitter and Instagram and wherever GIF variety, skews femme and skews queer and is like has allowed for the proliferation of and like more discovery of films that are outside of the dude canon. And I don't know, I just wanted to ask you what you thought about that as like a way to share. Is it, as you said, like kind of advertising or like, hey, check out this cool movie, like if you like this picture you should dig into where it comes from? Did you just start doing it as a way to like show off that you had heard of all this cool stuff? Like, how do you feel about it?
No, my sort of the long and winding road of how I ended up doing social for studios for a while was that I mentioned, I think just a second ago, that March that I watched like 200 movies or whatever. Hilariously, I'm back in my parents' house, but at the time I was in what we called the cat hole, which is a horrible add-on. That's where all the cats used to live.
Okay.
But for a while, that was where I was sleeping. It's a long story. And I had dropped out of fashion school, and all I did was watch TCM for like 18 hours a day and occasionally substitute teach 5-year-olds. And it was a very bleak existence. And I just took a lot of screenshots and put them on Tumblr, put them on Twitter. I was just always posting like, here's this movie I watched, enjoy it. It was pre-Letterboxd days. And I guess someone at Warner Brothers, I think it was Matt Patterson, who is not at Warner Brothers anymore, but he used to have a podcast for Warner Archive. He was like, you're getting people hyped about these movies no one's heard of. Just finding the right still, basically. So he got me hired at Warner Brothers out of nowhere. It was crazy. And
That's crazy.
Once I had the power to like not just have it on my own channels, but have it on, at one point it was Warner Brothers, another point it was Turner Classic Movies, Filmstruck. For a hot minute it was Netflix. My goal was always, and now it's Criterion, my goal was always, how do you can't sell people on movies. That's the rub that has always been an issue with Hollywood, and people don't understand is you literally can't like bonanza bargain someone into watching a movie. That's just not how it works. You have to have something that's arresting, right? Like, for example, I watched After Hours. I'd never heard of it because I saw that still of him looking at his own Wanted poster. And I was like, what is this movie?
Yeah.
It's the image. The image does the selling. That's it.
Yeah.
I wish the Hollywood higher ups would realize that, because half the posters coming out today look like garbage. But that's a side point. So what I always did was like, this is how I always sold myself on studio heads, was like, just give me access to the movies and I will find the one still that will make everyone watch it. I promise. Made quite a career out of that skill.
Yeah.
But and then, what I did was just, I put out as many stills, whether it was official photography or screenshots I made. And then with Filmstruck, I didn't have a budget and we were launching this huge product. And I told my boss, I was like, I'm making a bunch of gifs. Each gif is going to have like an emotional use. Like, I'm not putting anything out there that you can't type in a keyword that is not related to the movie, just a keyword, an emotion, a feeling, and a Filmstruck gif is going to pop up. And that's how we're going to sell it to people. Now, did it get people to subscribe to Filmstruck? I don't know. I don't really care. Did it get people to use those gifs and probably seek out those movies? I think yes. And that was ultimately all I care about, because I don't really want to feed the capitalist machine. I just want people to watch movies.
Yeah.
So that's how I used those platforms. And that's why there's so many of those gifs, is that was the only marketing assets I had. And it's a skill I have. So, and I do think stills and gifs in particular, I love, because it's like a little micro movie, right?
Yeah, sure.
And especially now you can upload almost a 30-second one. But there's something about seeing it on a loop that you're just like, what is this?
Right.
Like, it just, I don't know, it's mesmerizing. And then you get just enough of a taste. It's like those little plates at Costco. You taste it now, you have to buy a bunch of the cheeseburgers or whatever it is. Like, that's what I feel like gifts do. And so I've just, that's been, that's what I've spent a lot of the last decade of my life, just putting as many of those gifts out there. But when I was at Filmstruck, one of the things I particularly made sure to do, and I think you kind of pointed this out, is at least half of the gifts I made were either directed by women or featured women, or people of color, because I wanted to make sure that, especially on Giphy, if you typed in like directed by women on Giphy, there was like, it was like nothing. A desert. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure that those films would have a life, would have a way of being discovered, and specifically be discovered in an organic way. Because again, I don't think you can actually sell a movie. I just don't think that's possible. You have to organically want to see it. You can't make someone want to see something in the hard sell way, but you can soft sell, make someone intrigued. It's that like kind of FOMO feeling. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, you see enough gifs of Paris, Texas, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm going to watch
like, what
Paris,
is
Texas
this?
now.
Yeah.
I'm going to sneak in a question here, because you kind of answered like 55% of it already. So I just, since I already wanted to know it, I'll just kind of like bring it home. Because you are such a great advocate for film, and like you said, specifically with Year with Women and women filmmakers, but also people of color and just noir and all these films that you feel like people haven't seen. Do you see that? Maybe you see it in lots of ways, but do you see that as a project just to bring people to great art, specifically art that has been maybe intentionally marginalized or just slept on? Or is there an aspect of like a future facing goal of creating incentives for different types of movies to be made, right? Like you talked about not wanting to feed the capitalist machine, but is it like reclamation? Is it about the future? Is it a mix? What do you see as your goal?
It's both. I think when it started, my real goal, because again, I was living in the cat hole. That's literally what we called it. And and TCM really came in and gave me an emotional raft. Like I was not doing well. I dropped out of grad school because of mental health issues and some other things, and it gave me a real raft. And then getting obsessed with film history. The thing is, as you can tell from this podcast, you start one place, and the next thing you know, you're 17,000 other places, and it never ends. Like there's no end to what you can learn about film on literally any thread until you die, and then you probably regret that you didn't get one more thread, so it started with that, and then started with just a desire to share what I love, because if it helped me, maybe it'll help somebody else, right? But then it kind of transformed with A Year with Women into just an advocacy of, there were so many articles of like films by women you should know. And it was the same 10 films or the same maybe 50 films. And I was like, there's literally thousands of films directed by women. I hadn't at that point seen them. At this point now I've seen quite a few, but I knew they existed. And so I thought, well, if I talk about it, then maybe that will create a desire for more people to want to see them. And that will create a viability to release the films. That was kind of the goal. I don't know how much of that was, I think I'm just like a drop in that wave, but it was definitely a successful wave, because, from when I started that project to where we are almost 10 years later, the amount of films available on streaming and discs is like huge. Right. And I will take credit. I did Filmstruck when they had their directed by women stuff. That was literally my work, and my going through every single film we had a license for and being like, here's 200 films, figure out how to put them on there, please. Come on, you can do it. I'm gonna take that one, because I did do that. But it did, you've seen it, like the aperture open, more and more films are accessible, and then the second outcome from that is just, now there's more and more women who know women can do it, who have women they can pull from. So you can see the just the inspiration, visual inspirations or visual ways of telling stories can alter, because you see how other women have done it. And I've definitely heard from a few women who've made films that they followed me on Tumblr and decided they wanted to be a director because of something I posted. And I was like, I love that. I love that. Yeah. So, and that wasn't, I didn't think I could do that. I was just a nerd on Tumblr. But I think the more you see people posting about women making films, the more likely you are to seek them out, to become one if you are a woman, to just know there's a path. In the book that I wrote, a lot of the women I've spoken to, I'm not going to say who I spoke to yet, coming out soon, the list, I think. But a lot of them were pioneers in the 70s and 80s, when maybe they'd heard of Leni Riefenstahl, which is always horrible when that's the only filmmaker you've heard of. Right. And maybe they heard of Ida Lupino. But some of them are in countries where, a woman hadn't made a film since the 20s or the 40s. And they just did it, right? They just went forward. And then because they went forward, other women saw them and went forward. And some of the women I talked to, the other women I talked to were like, yeah, I started making movies because of this woman. And so they're all kind of connected. And so I guess the ethos, or the kind of the answer there is, once you start doing something like that, it has the unintended waves. Like it creates unintended alleyways for people to creak in. Yeah. And sometimes it'll, I know some people who've become film critics because they were like, oh, I've seen women who can write and talk about films, or I don't like that men don't like the films by women, so I want to be the one talking about films by women. It's like it's the same thing with the red thread. It's just, there's so many, it just goes everywhere. And you just, what I always try to do is just focus on like putting something positive forward and hope whatever comes from it, whether it's a filmmaker, another critic, a film getting restored, whatever it is. I'm hoping the positivity is went towards that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the enthusiasm and the just sort of like the love of cinema kind of without judgment, just sort of, hey, look at this thing's cool, and this thing's cool too. Like all of those gifs make me want to watch a movie. Like that's the whenever I see
that was the goal.
Yeah. And it's not even necessarily that movie. It's sometimes
movie.
Just remind me like, oh yeah, I like this feeling that I'm having right now. I should go back to my big list of movies.
And then unfortunately though, capitalism always comes in and you have to figure out how to feed yourself. But I have thankfully in all these years always have enough to feed me and my cat. So that's really all that matters.
Want.
A beautiful thing. we could, the thing I'm about to bring up is maybe dangerous because we could talk about it for 15 hours, but Paul Schrader and the 2022 Sight and Sound list, I feel we need to raise at this point. First of all, I want to quote Schrader in his own interview in 2023 where he's asked about this. He's promoting Master Gardener at the time, and he says, he's referring to, quote, the inherent conundrum of Calvinism. Man is incapable of good, but he must try. And I think we should apply this to Paul Schrader, who is constantly incapable of good, but trying. So in 2006, he writes this very long piece for Film Comment that was going to be a book. The piece is called Canon Fodder, and he was like he wanted to write a book about the canon of film, and so then he started going deep on like the history of canons and audited a bunch of classes at Columbia. Like he went nuts. And the intro, it goes into all kinds of stuff about like Matthew Arnold, and like he's connecting
literary biblical canons.
Yes, the canon. He talks about the canon first referring to the sort of the true Bible, and then everything else is the Apocrypha. So I do think we should refer to this in like Rolling Thunder and Obsession as the Apocrypha, the Schrader Apocrypha.
Gnostic Gospels. Great.
Exactly. But he seems to kind of have this weird relationship with... He has a weird relationship with the canon because he has a weird relationship with everything because he's a weird man. But he wants he at once sees like the problem of a canon, but also wants to establish a canon, I think, because it's fun to be in charge of the list. But he talks about referring to Harold Bloom's The Western Canon, which he refers to as like deeply retrograde and like dead white man canon, but also then complains about what he calls the non-judgmentals, which he says are pleaders of special causes, minority, gender, and cultural studies, black studies, Latino, feminist, gay, etc. By separating a select group of artworks from the larger dead white male panorama, a critic can study the works as part of a subset, evaluating them by how they function in the subset. These are fascinating, important studies. They have the added benefit of freeing the critic from having to pass judgment. So he's sort of tied up in like... He seems to still hold on to this idea that the critic's job is to say like what is good and what is bad, what is beautiful and what is not beautiful. And I think it's just like kind of some old man bullshit he can't let go of. So that's 2006. Fast forward to 2022 when Jean Dielman tops the Sight and Sound poll, and he posts on Facebook. He says, quote, for 70 years, the Sight and Sound poll has been a reliable, if somewhat incremental measure of critical consensus and priorities. Films moved up the list, others moved down, but it took time. The sudden appearance of Jean Dielman in the number one slot undermines the SNS poll's credibility. It feels off, as if someone had put their thumb on the scale, which I suspect they did. As Tom Stopper pointed out in Jumpers, in democracy it doesn't matter who gets the votes, it matters who counts the votes. By expanding the voting community and the point system, this year's SNS poll reflects not a historical continuum, but a politically correct rejiggering. Ackerman's film is a favorite of mine, a great film, a landmark film, but its unexpected number one rating does it no favors. Jean Dielman will, from this time forward, be remembered not only a important film in cinema history, but also as a landmark of distorted woke reappraisal. So he's like...
Damn.
He's doing two things here where at once I think he has a fair point about like the pressure put on the number one film of all time. I sometimes think of this as like the Artist effect, where like being called Best Picture immediately makes everyone hate the movie The Artist because it's putting so much pressure on like a cute little movie. But like the fact that it has to be, you're going into it saying, oh, this is the best picture of the year, it's obviously going to disappoint. So there's that.
But this is also a classic case of just a smart guy who is wrong, where you will recognize that, oh, there's some interesting points in here, distinct arguments that are just mixed in with a bunch of totally facile or straight up false arguments.
And what's crazy is that in 2022, he's referring to like fraudulent vote counts and like distorted woke reappraisal.
And yet, one of his most recent posts, he said, I just watched Ava DuVernay's Origin. It's a masterpiece. And I, as an idiot Academy voter, just discounted it because I'm a moron. And it's like, maybe it's fascinating when he can recognize his own bias and when he can't.
Yep.
You know, it's like,
man is incapable of good, but he must try.
It's always, every time I'm like, I'm going to throw him in the bin, he does something where I'm like, I can't throw him in the bin.
That's why he's so fascinating. But like, it's not that it's a competition, but I think like if we're comparing these two acts of like film canonization or whatever, Smukler's is the one that contributes in a tangible way to the history of film. Because like after they programmed this movie at UCLA, because she wrote about it in her book, and Tewkesbury is there, and Pressman is there. Yeah,
this whole thing happened 2 weeks before I moved to LA, when I had moved there to work for Netflix. I was so mad. I missed the whole thing. I think I saw Crossing Delancey. I was in town for my in-town interview just in time to see Crossing Delancey, and that was it.
Wow.
When is that coming out from Criterion? Damn it.
Yeah.
I love that movie so much.
Criterion, if you're listening, first of all, I'm surprised. But so they show this like lousy print, but there's enough like after that, like they then Rialto Pictures like search around and found the negative, and like as a result of this work that Smukler does, there is literally like this movie will survive. And like I love reading the stuff that Paul Schrader writes, but like no offense, The Leopard doesn't need your help to like stay in print or whatever. So it's I don't know, what a strange man.
Yeah. I mean, he's mixing the classic condescension of like Harold Bloom style canon defenders, which is saying, oh, you are bringing political correctness in and valuing that over quality in art, but also recognizing that, hey, historical structures and literal like materialist requirements that shut out other types of filmmakers may have prevented great films from being either made or seen or whatever. So, these two ideas seemingly not compatible at all to me, to be able to say like, hey, there's some films that, weren't allowed to be, like I said, seen or made, or huge swaths of the population whose perspective is not being represented. I don't literally just mean like a film about being a black woman. I just mean like all the things that a black woman might be interested in making a film about, which are nearly infinite, are just not making it to the screen. And I feel like as a logical person thinking about art, it just becomes like, or just like somebody who's aware of statistics. Wouldn't you want to increase the stories being told in order to find more interesting stories?
Yeah. And he talks about how, post Me Too, that everyone felt compelled to put one film by a woman director on their list, and most people pick Jean Dielman, and like he thinks that this is not what, but we talked about this poll a million years ago when it happened, but it's like a core sample of the critical consensus or whatever. Like it just is that's why you do it over and over again.
The thing that he's missing, and I will say I did have a ballot, and Jean Dielman was the first film I put on my list, and then I had 80 other films that I whittled down to 9 spots, and it was hard. And
I was going to say your ballot is also entirely films directed by women. So
I had 80 films from 80 different female directors.
Holy shit!
Plus like 10 Vardas. I had to decide which Varda I wanted to put.
Right.
It was like Jean Dielman, Varda, and then 79 other. No, is that math right? 78 other female directors that I was trying to whittle it down, because I, in my opinion, and I think this is what he's missing, is that for some people, myself included, those films by women are just as good, if not better, than any film that has ever been canonized.
Yeah.
And the idea that it's skewed out of a woke thing is less that and more people like me who would have always had this kind of film on my ballot got a vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Yes.
changed. It wasn't that Jean Dielman, like that people stacked their votes. It was that people who would always have voted for Jean Dielman finally got a vote. Right. But also that film, he didn't take into account, and obviously this is a Facebook rant, not a researched post or whatever.
Yeah.
That film didn't really get much of a release in the United States until that Criterion release 10 years prior. Right. And I think there was like maybe a couple years before the 2012 one, it had the first DVD release in France because of Hubert. And so you saw it on the 2012 list for the first time, crack the 100, right? So it was coming just because it was available. So what he was missing, and I think the analysis a lot of people were missing, was that one, they doubled it, I think, for 2012, something like that. And it had gone from 300 people to 600 people or some number like that. And that film became more available. So suddenly it was on the list. Then you double again, and it's even more available because of the Criterion release. And suddenly, of course, it's going to it's going to jump.
Yeah.
It was a jump for throwing Me Too and the woke everything aside.
Yeah.
Just where that film's trajectory was headed there anyways. And I think he's missing that. And, it's depressing sometimes when he has this huge microphone or megaphone and just says things that are often ahistorical.
Yeah.
Just like, just step back from your emotions a little bit and think about, like, logically, where was this film headed anyways?
Especially considering recent subject of the Paul Schrader Apocrypha series Obsession, which is like a riff on Vertigo, which had exactly the same trajectory because Vertigo wasn't available, or like no one really showed it for like 10 years. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
I mean,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, old guys who were in charge of everything who suddenly feel like they're less in charge of everything.
Everything's woke. Oh no. My favorite ballot on that whole thing is my friend Maggie, who is a silent film specialty. That's what she specializes in.
Yeah.
She had I think all 10 of hers were Leontine shorts from the 19 teens.
Really
Leontine is an unknown, that's her subject of her research, female comedian. She was the most famous, most popular comedian in the teens in France. There's a million Leontine films. Only a few are still extant. And she's dedicated her life to like finding out who really was Leontine, because that's her character name, right?
Oh, cool.
So she put 10 of those films, and then plus I think is it Maggie Doodle's Doodad? I can't remember what it's called. There's another silent comedian film that she loves. And then she wrote in her note, I am completely comfortable with this list.
Yeah.
And I was
love that.
Yes. That's the kind of, that's what that list should also be, is like what, like the reason, obviously I would have had 10 films by women regardless, but I specifically chose films that I thought, or at least half of them are films that I thought that I might be the only person that put it on there. But I know when 2012 came out, I looked at everyone's individual ballot because I wanted to see what people were into. And so I figured, well, somebody's going to stumble on my ballot, and then they're going to watch Hester Street for the first time. And that's, they're going to win. Everyone's going to win.
Right.
So, like, some people had like things like Jurassic Park and stuff. And I'm like, I love Jurassic Park.
Right.
Jurassic Park goes hard, but like, does anyone need to discover Jurassic Park?
I think it was S.S. Rajamouli, the guy who directed RRR, put Forrest Gump on. He has like several Robert Zemeckis films on his ballot, and like Toy Story, which like, those are fun movies, but like, what are we, if like, let's not take this quite so seriously, Paul.
Yeah. Another one that I really respected was Julie Dash. She put The Woman King, which at the time her ballot was turned in had just been in theaters. And I actually had the fortunate opportunity to talk to her just a little bit after that at an event. And I was like, I just love that you had that on your ballot. And she's like, I saw that movie and I was like, I wish this movie existed when I was a kid. And I was like, that's it right there.
I mean, that was one of the most like electrifying crowd experiences I've had, was watching that movie. People are just like insanely pumped, and like, I don't know, I have to wait 25 years to decide that I still think fondly of that movie. If this was
a movie that would have changed your life when you were a kid and you're 65 now or whatever, then there you go. That's on your list.
Paul Schrader famously didn't see a movie till he was like 20, so he's a freak.
Yeah.
if we're talking about the function of democratizing canon construction, its multiplicity, I think, is one of its greatest strengths. Is to say some people might have different desires in how they put their ballot into something like this, and maybe that's feels too focused, but it's also ridiculous for somebody like Paul Schrader to say everybody else's goal in constructing their list should be identical to mine, when we know that the way these lists are engaged with, like you're talking about, some people might just be using them to discover films.
Right.
Some people might be using them in the more classic canon idea of like, where do I start, or how do I build some type of hierarchy of like people who do things very well. But we know that the way that you even watch a film is not singular, right? It's, at least for me, it's not like I leave the film and say, okay, I will now give it a numerical ranking.
The other thing that I think he's missing, back to Schrader, what he's missing in terms of what a list like this does, is it doesn't just highlight what is great or what is in the conversation. It also can highlight what is still hidden.
Mm-hmm.
Because as Carlos Aguilar pointed out, there was nothing from Central or South America still.
Yep.
And I think two films from Africa, and they were from the same director. So it's like, there's still some major gaps in terms of world cinema that a consensus that big is still missing. There's still, and it can't just always, and this is, gotta agree with Schrader sometimes, it can't always just be, well, let's get a bigger amount of who's talking, right? Obviously, clearly there's still some gaps in people who are specialists in that area. But at the same time, how is it, even without those specialists, that region is still ignored? That means everyone else is not. They shouldn't rely on specialists only, which is how I was so happy when Jean Dielman ended up on there, because it isn't just specialists. It isn't just people like me who are always going to put Jean Dielman. So that film is getting further into truly the canon. But there are still gaps. And so that list, I think one of my phrases I always used to tweet all the time is make better lists. And I believe that because lists should not be stagnant. They should always change, and they should always reveal both what is bubbling in the conversation, but also what is missing from this list. And if so, how can you, as an avid moviegoer, help get more people to see these things that if you are the specialist, or you are someone who is passionate about what's missing. That's pretty much what fueled A Year with Women, was stupid lists where it'd be 300 films and 2 films by women. And I'm like, well, this is bullshit.
It's just Hurt Locker on every single list or something.
Yeah, on every list. Yeah.
And Zero Dark 30.
And Point Break.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, hold on. Point Break.
I will say, Big Will makes great films. But she's not the only one. She's not the only one.
That's our point here, I think.
I was going to say that I think one of the things that is so valuable about Letterboxd type platforms and Twitter projects and like the kinds of things that you have been a big part of, Marya, is like these lists that are all interconnected with one another, where if I remember in like June of 2020, there were lists of films about the Black experience that were popping up all over the place. And if you feel like I don't know where to start to understand something that I haven't taken the time to understand before, a list has popped up. I can open a couple of them. This movie shows up on 3 of the lists. It's probably important. I'll start there. You can also find like there's lists on Letterboxd of every movie ever made that was directed by a woman, according to the person who spent all the time putting that together.
And it's like 60,000 films, and then you don't know where to start.
Maybe not that useful, but it's fun to see where that is also intersecting with the cross-section of films in which Tony Bennett appears as himself, is cross-sected with the films where someone eats a hamburger or whatever. And there's lists that are based on quality. There's lists that are based on completionism. There's lists that are jokes. And I think the proliferation of lists is ultimately like enriching. And I think that one of the things that, as we've found in tangenting this way and that, like one of my favorite things about talking about movies is the way that you can sort of cut across history and culture and all these things and end up talking about all of human experience, and then eventually remember that you should probably talk about the John Belushi part of the movie at some point. But do we have any more thoughts on the Paul Schrader sight and sound situation for now?
Yeah, I think I said what I had to say.
Okay, he's in the ground. We've buried him.
He's not in the bin. He's not in the bin just yet, though. He the Ava thing, literally saying I was biased against this movie and I'm an idiot. I was like, damn it, Schrader. I
he always surprises. That's what's so fascinating about him. Is
it really is.
He's incapable of good, but he must try. So, speaking of
intensely flawed men,
incapable of good, so we've got this character Eric, who was like, it feels like maybe sort of a boyfriend of convenience kind of a thing in high school, and he's just a loser, this guy, and he invites her to the high school dance, and he's doing his Blues Brothers thing, but I can't tell, is he dialing down the charisma or did he not have it yet? Like, that's what I was trying to figure out, was like, is he intentionally making this a little less cool than it seems
I think he's dialing it down.
Blues Brothers? Okay.
Tewkesbury talks very positively about working with Belushi. She talks,
everybody does, and they all say that they loved working with him and they begged him to stop doing drugs.
And he brought one of the Blues Brothers musicians onto the thing. Yeah, I think it's purposefully like the bad version of like you said, this is
the
like
chipped mirror or whatever.
What the real Blues Brothers would be like.
Yeah.
Watching if it wasn't a talented, insanely charismatic guy at the center. Yeah.
The Weekend Warrior bar band version of the Blues Brothers.
This is maybe my favorite John Belushi performance, even though he plays such a creep. I really love him in this
very
film.
Impressive. Yeah.
I mean, it's even though Schrader didn't direct this, and I think he was like an executive producer, I don't think he was very hands-on at all. It does form a kind of continuity with the casting of Richard Pryor in Blue Collar, and he'll continue to cast comedians in dramatic roles in a way that's really fascinating and like charges the movie with an interesting energy where, like, you know, Belushi thinks he is killing it, or like the character thinks he is absolutely crushing these interactions.
I think what makes him even more interesting to me is he seems to be like riding this razor's edge of awareness about his own success and about like his past with Diane, Talia Shire's character, where obviously, like we sort of gestured to, the end of their relationship was like him trying to almost violently pressure her into sex. You know, there's a mention of him tearing off her underwear and then, doing the other misogynist young man thing of just humiliating her in public and bringing those underwear to like a basketball game and showing them and causing like real emotional psychological harm. But he is like almost aware of what he's done, but also is willing to accept when she hints to him that maybe they might still have something, or like she misses him. So, which I think is the perfect way to do it, right? Because if he was totally unaware, then maybe that's like feels like a scot-free representation of these people, these men who cause great harm. And if he was fully aware, then that becomes like maybe a little bit unrealistic in the sense of saying that, like, you know, every type of damage that men do to women, they're doing knowingly, where I feel like what makes it so awful is that it's a mix, right, of knowing and unknowing damage all the time. I enjoy this character who is like just like flitting back and forth between these two positions, and like you're saying, is so pathetic, but thinks he's pretty cool, but maybe knows he's not that cool.
The part that I think most women have experienced, whether in person or in the horrible online world of dating, where he finally realizes what she's doing to him, and he gives up the whole pretense of being polite and just starts calling her a cunt.
Yep.
Everyone has had that happen at least once with some guy who turns it off eventually. And then it makes you question when it does happen. I think she's already past this point, but for a lot of, really from my perspective, when it does happen, at least the first time, you're like, were you ever nice? Or were you masking the, like, you thought I was a cunt the whole time? Like, I really don't know.
Yeah, when he gives his speech, he repeats his speech in this like very uncanny way where he like it brings out this ghost from the past to start speaking to her. And like you said, I think at this point we already suspect that it's a total facade, but it's very scary to be adults or have an adult Talia Shire listening to what, again, it's not to say that whatever he was, 17-year-old is like totally aware of what he's doing, but if he can recall it this handily, it makes it seem like he was at least fairly aware of how he was going to convince her to say, everybody's having sex, I'll respect you even more. Right. These things that weirdly are like also kind of playing with like women's liberation ideas, right? To say
yeah. I mean, I remember that the first time I sort of realized this was, of course, the great film Anchorman, where Tim Robbins hits on Christina Applegate by saying, we're really down with the women's lib thing over at PBS or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that, and maybe this is, I'm, as I said before, at least medium stupid, but I don't think I knew that they knew the phrase "just the tip" in 1979. I assumed that was invented by Vince Vaughn on the set of Old School or something.
Sure, no.
It's just like the whole scene is very bracing to realize that this sort of experience was being. I mean, I guess you get a similar sequence in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but like the particular drawn out discomfort of it is something that I wasn't familiar with until like in seeing on screen until like 8th grade. I remember there's that whoa, and I just remembered I saw 8th grade in the same theater as Vince Vaughn. It's all that's real. He like walked into the I'm freaking out, man. They cut the wrong thing in my sinuses the other day, and it's all
sure. It's about to fade to white here. Yeah.
Right. I'm going Lucy mode, like Lucy from Lucy.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. And then she like humiliates him and leaves him pantsless on top of the hill, which I was, glad to see, but it's also a regression on her part. Like it's simple revenge. It's not growth.
Well,
it's
like Mariah said, we're not left with a clear sense that this has actually been helpful for her. We understand the impulse, but it's not obvious that this was something that will free her. Exactly.
And this is like the closest that we get to her sort of carrying out what the score is suggesting might be coming.
Mm-hmm.
Until we get to, by the way, I just want to check in. How's everybody on time? I know it's after 4.
Oh, I'm good.
You're good?
Me too.
Okay.
I've got my glass of water, so.
Okay.
Sweet.
Beautiful.
Right. So do we have any further thoughts on Belushi? Ian, you wanted to do your impression of his samurai character from SNL. I know.
Did not.
You wanted to do that really quick?
Only speaking of that, the only thing I want to shout is that because we just watched Girlfriends and Christopher Guest is in it in a really wonderful role.
Yeah.
I was thinking about these guys who are doing.
You see Christopher Guest's butt.
You do see his butt. He's hot in there. I mean, he's just often hot.
Yeah, he's a cutie pie. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's cool that some of these guys and these, not famously SNL as a comedy institution, not famously great for women, but some of them were getting involved with nice stuff. And you mentioned the shot of the hotel room. Tewkesbury gives a lot of credit to Peter Jameson, and she shouts out a bunch of, I will say, Belushi and Altman, and she, I think, is very humbly and sort of bravely saying that obviously at a time when there weren't that many women producers and women supporting women, it was nice that there were some men who were actually making genuine strides, right? Not empty strides.
Right.
Like our friend Paul Schrader, who says, like, I gave this to a woman because I wanted to have a woman direct it. And then he immediately says, and I regretted it.
Yes.
I wish I had directed it. So,
yeah.
But she says, like, there were men, and, Peter Jameson, I guess, became a regular collaborator. He was the production designer who came up with this beautiful gauche red hotel room, very bizarre.
I did want to
adjacent.
Ask what you guys thought of her calling down and asking. It's as if she assumes all hotels have several colors of ribbon, because she's like, "Can you wrap it in a red ribbon?" And they're just like, "Yeah." Like, what?
Well, that I worked at a hotel front desk and answering phones in a hotel, so
I know this. Did they? What was the ribbon drawer looking like?
I can tell you that for enough money, we would go out and get anything available, basically within like a 1 mile radius.
Fair enough.
She would have just been charged like $300 for this, probably.
Oh, I failed to mention that Schrader he gave an interview around the cannon fodder article where he was doing a Q&A thing with Kent Jones at the Film Society of Lincoln Center. And he was talking about how the quintessential film of the 20th century to him was made by a woman, but it was Triumph of the Will. So I guess maybe he's...
Okay.
Maybe he's like kind of mixed up on like, well, like I can't give it to that one,
Sure.
but like I should, but yeah. He also quotes from memory, like off the dome, clearly unprepared, quotes both Kissinger and Goebbels in that interview.
Oof.
So interesting guy. Interesting guy.
Accidentally
alert.
drawing comparisons, though. I got to respect that. Putting them in the same bucket, intentionally or otherwise.
Yeah. No, I think he was, but also he does have their words committed to memory. So, but and he gets laughs both times. I don't know. So,
back in the bin. No.
Yes, exactly. He's got one leg in, one leg out. We've got a brief interlude where Richard Jordan goes to the private eye played by Buck Henry. This is just very fun. It's fun to see Buck Henry.
This scene is so good.
It is so
He's
good.
great.
It's just like, I love this scene.
And weirdly, I think maybe because they were shot at the same time, both this scene and a scene in Hardcore are shot in office buildings or hotels overlooking the Chinese theater where Star Wars is playing.
Yeah. If that's actually really close to where I want to say it's Roman Coppola, Gia Coppola's uncle, the one who's alive, but not Francis, has an office right near there, because I interviewed Gia a couple years ago and she said that she came up with the idea for the one she did with Andrew Garfield, like while walking to her uncle's office. So there's still offices right there, I guess. I would not personally want to work above
Absolutely
Boulevard.
not.
Yeah, I
No,
would want to
thank you.
drive there.
Yeah.
It's a real thing.
I was trying to figure out how long Star Wars was playing at the Chinese, because like I wouldn't be surprised if it was there for like a year.
It was there for a very long time, but on the opening night, just tie everything back to my parents' house where I'm currently at.
Please.
Before they moved up here to the middle of nowhere, they grew up in Los Angeles, and that's where they met in LA. And they went to see Star Wars on opening night at Grandma's Chinese, but they stupidly, because they're nerds, they were Star Trek nerds, and they were like, this is close, did not think it was going to blow up. And so they, casually strolled in for the 8 p.m. at like, 7:45 or whatever. It ended up being in line until 2 a.m. or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because they had to, so.
But they committed to it. They stuck to their...
They had driven in from the valley. What are they going to do?
This is what happens when there's no internet. This is what you do. You just wait in line. That's how you spend your time.
Line.
Yeah.
There was a lot of waiting online. Yeah. Tewkesbury says she put this little piece in the film on purpose because she includes Lucas in this group of people who, by breaking down the doors of the old men's club and creating a young white men's club, she said that was like still a tiny bit of progress somehow for them, which is bleak to think about, obviously.
Well, it seems from reading like Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, it seems like a lot of these young white men were at least easier to like deceive or like trick with your feminine wiles based on some of the things that like...
Sure.
I mean, it just, they seem like dorks where you could kind of like influence them more easily than like a Jack Warner or something. Which I suppose
that makes sense.
I do think the young generation were less afraid of women.
That's what I think she's saying. Yeah,
less afraid, less paternalistic.
I would think. I would say maybe more afraid, but in a way that was
productively afraid,
helpful for the women. Yeah. And then you do get...
I was thinking, you mentioned hardcore, and I was thinking if George C. Scott had hired Buck Henry, he would have found his daughter so much
I was thinking
sooner.
Exactly the same thing.
Like, the whole movie wouldn't have existed.
I was trying to figure out if there was any like crossover, because we realized that in the original screenplay for Rolling Thunder, there is a silent cameo by Travis Bickle. Like Paul Schrader just says that Travis Bickle's like sitting in the audience of a drive-in porn theater or something. So I wondered if Schrader had thrown in like a little nod to the Buck Henry PI, but maybe this was like an idea of Joan Tewkesbury's, and Schrader didn't want any part of it.
Yeah, but this is just master filmmaking where you create an entire world out of a character who's on screen for 4 minutes or something.
And I think it's maybe only possible to do with Buck Henry.
Yeah, it's one of the great multi hyphenates of the era. Yeah,
what a guy! It's Art Koppel. That's a great PI name as well. So he learns that Diane's husband did not die. She lied about that. They split up. She's not been coming into work. There's a great shot of a bunch of tiny little figurines in like the like child psychologist's office, which Ian, I'm sure, like excited you a lot. You were reaching into your television trying to touch all the little toys.
The figurines were very beautiful. I know you're mocking me, but I also think they work on an analog scale, like an analogy scale, I should say, where the psychiatrist that he's talking to says, they're like good to push around and like it makes it easier to express.
She's sort of playing with people like they're her action figures, her
which
dolls,
is exactly what Talia Shire's doing. Yeah,
much like Barry Keoghan in Saltburn.
Sure.
Okay.
I was going to say that there's a bit of a promising young woman sort of vibe to the
I absolutely think this. If
the Belushi
I
section,
wish I could have asked her, but this feels like a movie that Emerald saw and was like, "I'm going to do this."
Just the Belushi part. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really feels. I probably should have Googled this, but it definitely feels like a movie that was inspirational to that one. Or at least would make a great double feature regardless.
Yeah, we can find the inspiration.
I did want to ask you, Marya, also thinking about there's so many ways that women influence the production of a film that isn't just writing and directing, because obviously there's so many great women who have edited films.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, on the producing side, I know that the film was directed by a woman as well, but like thinking about, Margot Robbie is now becoming like a big old powerhouse producer. Like, it's interesting looking at the kind of how quickly the auteur theory falls apart when you have, like, we're talking about a Joan Tewkesbury movie on our Paul Schrader podcast. Mm-hmm. Two of the first Clint Eastwood movies were written by a woman. And like, there are obviously there's many voices involved in these things, but like, I don't know. Do you think that a movie produced by a woman that's written and directed by men, like, does that not go on the list? Is that, I guess it probably depends on the film, but like,
that's definitely one of those. I think it depends on the film because, obviously there are, I guess Kathleen Kennedy is a great example of like, do you see the film she's produced and go, a woman, like, not really,
right.
Like in some of the characters, maybe.
Sure.
But yeah, I think
it's not really that challenging when you're like, you got to watch movies by women and it's Star Wars, It's like,
I think the reason originally when I launched A Year with Women, I had said directed or written by, and quite frankly, I only included written by so I could do Noirvember.
Sure.
Actually, if you look at the list that I did, I only did the written by for Noirvember, and so I could watch It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve.
There you go.
I added that for that sole purpose because I think the challenge wasn't necessarily, or the goal of the challenge was to zero in on a blind spot. And to your point, like, it's not, yes, you can include producers, but if you then use that as an out to only watch the kind of films you were already watching, does that actually challenge you as a viewer, as a lover of history, as anything, right?
Right.
No, not really, no. So, but it does, I don't want to like discount all of the great women who have edited and shot films and produced films. Like that's valid and should be talked about as well. But the challenge in particular, and I still use the 52 films by women hashtag that erroneously several people have said I created, but actually Women in Film Hollywood or Women in Film LA created that for a 3-year thing that they were doing, and then they abandoned it and deleted their website. But I found that a lot of people, all the history about what that existed is gone. But I do find that people still use that, and I do think that the bare minimum of one film a week directed by a woman is still decent goal for people. Especially for people who are like me and watch maybe a film a day. Like that's still, if you're doing, say you're doing a film a day and you're only doing one a week directed by a woman, you're still barely
minimum.
dipping into the vast history of films by women. So, but I also think that can be difficult because
sure. I mean, like
a film just by the one filmmaker? I don't agree with that necessarily either.
It seems like the recent Yorgos Lanthimos Emma Stone collaboration is like very. They seem to be working very closely, but like her name isn't. It's not directed by her or like written by her. But everything that they talk about seems to indicate that she's like a very big creative voice in the process. So yeah, it's
or like Mike Lee films, or these films that like you're saying, where people are like secret filmmakers, basically, or like Before Sunrise. These heavily collaboration.
Just recently, Drive Away Dolls is listed as the Coen brother, but really Trisha co-directed it. The DGA won't let them be listed because of the same stupid rules that makes it look like only one of them directed Fargo when they both directed Fargo.
It's goofy.
It's very goofy. I am never really that big on auteur theory, even though on my old blog I did have an auteur of the week because I vaguely did 15 years ago. I was like, when I was first sort of reading about stuff. The more films you watch, the more I think you realize almost all of these theories are called theory for a reason. They're a tool and a lens. They're not necessarily a hard and fast rule, right? Yep. And unfortunately, a lot of people look at things that should be a lens as a hard and fast rule, and that's where you get into murky absolutes that I think there's no absolutes in it. The only absolute is that there are no absolutes, in my opinion. Yeah,
I think Paul Schrader would do well to heed the warning of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
The Sith.
Or whatever.
He should know of anybody. He should know that everything is a lens because you feel him coming through in the films that he wrote but didn't direct.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still not 100% him. That you think he would know better, but well, I don't know. Maybe he thinks he's the auteur of all those films. I don't know.
Fascinating man.
Character syndrome or
somebody
something.
Should really do a podcast about him. So we come now to the Keith Carradine portion of the film, which is she basically goes Jonathan Glazer birth mode on this guy. She so she shows up at this house and it's been so long since she saw Lewis that she assumes that Keith Carradine, the very handsome, tall Keith Carradine, is her elementary school boyfriend. Would be nice, would be a great way for it to turn out.
Like that. Yep.
Keith Carradine, who is of course an Altman guy, but like very loyally an Alan Rudolph guy. He's in so many Alan Rudolph movies.
Yeah, and he was in the two, both Nashville and Thieves Like Us.
Exactly,
he had that Tewkesbury connection there.
Mm-hmm. His first screen credit is McCabe and Mrs. Miller, just like her. Mm-hmm. So, but this guy has, I guess, like a vaguely, I don't know. I don't know how believable this psychological condition is.
Sure.
Yeah.
It mostly functions, I think, on paper very well because what we encounter is somebody who is actually trapped in his past and who has literally built his identity out of another person, which is, of course, what's happening to Talia Shire, what was threatening to happen.
It reminded me a little bit of the Charlize Theron character in Arrested Development, where he is very carefully, like plausibly, deniably, sort of intellectually capable in a way that we don't immediately write Talia Shire off until John Houseman tells us to, basically. But it's yucky. It's like
it's a great performance from him though, where he balances, like, you're like, oh, this is just a 27-year-old guy who has failure to launch, and then you see the scene in the attic where he's bouncing around like a 12-year-old, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, he does this thing where he's like he swings himself on the banister
just
or something,
like a kid.
And comparing this to Nashville, where he is like the hottest scumbag alive, where you're like, I know this man will hurt me, but I am down for it anyway because look at him.
After I rewatched this, I texted my friend and I was like, I'm sorry, I was 2 a.m, but Keith Carradine's really hot.
Yes.
I mean, he's hot on Fargo. Like he's still got it.
He hot in Deadwood with the weird beard. Like,
I
actually got to interview him on a red carpet once, and I told him that I liked Welcome to LA. This was, I think I was 28.
Yeah.
Maybe at the time, 29. And he said I was a child and there was no possible way I'd seen that movie. Like, in a charming way.
Sure.
And I was like, you are aware you're at the TCM Film Festival.
Yeah.
Channel that introduces old movies to young people.
All the young people here are freaks, Keith. You have to keep up.
I mean, but he's really hot in person if anyone cares.
I mean, I believe
Which
it.
you should all care, yeah.
Yeah, which we do. And Tewkesbury makes him sound like the loveliest of all the lovely actors she talks about in this film.
Yeah.
She really seems to be fond of Carradine and how like quiet and thoughtful he is, and just like a hard worker who also is willing to take direction and a good collaborator.
Yeah.
So
seems like maybe the best Carradine from what we can tell.
I think he is. I really do. He's just a good guy. He wants people to watch movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, seems like a charmer.
He told me I should be a director, and I still haven't done it. So you know,
there's still time.
I feel like every time I haven't made a film, I'm letting Keith Carradine down.
No. His advice is permanent.
Exactly.
I'll dedicate my first film to Keith.
There you go.
Great.
Maybe he'll be in it. He seems like he works a lot.
Could be
That's
like
true,
the Eli Wallach in Your Girlfriends. That would be great.
You know what? I love that idea. I'm going to steal that.
Perfect. Or Eli Wallach in The Holiday.
He'll be the old boyfriend.
Yeah, the old.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. But like, yeah, she basically has, I think, has sex with him to try to. She thinks she's helping him because she's sort of a social worker or something. It's a little unclear what her training is.
I think she's some type of therapist, but she dresses him in his brother's clothes, and then...
she does some very experimental 70s style regression role play.
We call it transference,
I
right?
know.
That's what
Yes.
John Houseman tells her not to do.
Right.
This is the most dangerous thing you could have done with transference.
Right. It's like the most dangerous kind of psychiatric warfare or something. Yeah.
This is worse than any surgeon could have done to him. Oh, man.
Yes. Sorry, he calls it a powerful psychiatric weapon. That's what I...
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you, Ian, because you have a lot of medical knowledge in your family. Is it true that most surgeons cure by amputation? Because that doesn't seem like it can be true at all.
Certainly that's been true since about 1860, but
also,
maybe.
Is it true that impersonating a doctor is not a crime? Because I'm pretty sure it is a crime.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
That's for Chameleon Street to answer.
Yes. Yeah. It's messed up. John Houseman, of course, walks away. Like Buck Henry, he kind of walks away with the movie for just a second. I just know him as the guy from the beginning of The Fog. I didn't realize that he basically produced Citizen Kane and he was the founding director of the drama division at Juilliard. He's
whoa,
and he's fantastic in The Paper Chase. Won an Oscar.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest deals that there is in showbiz history. Which is cool. I don't know. It's great to see the guy. And
his, I think, first wife was the female mummy in The Mummy. So.
Whoa!
Right. Yeah, and then he was married.
The Mummy,
and then he was married to
Tom
Joan
Cruise
Fontaine, right? Or he was with Joan Fontaine forever.
I think it was Joan Fontaine.
Yeah. So
Joan Courtney. I don't know who Joan Courtney is.
Oh. Well,
shoot.
Joan nonetheless.
A Joan.
Yeah. Just like the one that directed the movie, but a different Joan. And so he basically tells her off into oblivion, and she weeps in that gorgeous blue bathroom that
those tiles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The tiles.
No, he was with Joan Fontaine.
Okay. There we go.
I misread this.
1 point for Jake.
You are correct.
Thank you so much.
I just can't read even though I have my glasses on.
Right.
And then she goes back to her house and Richard Jordan is there looking. He kind of has Kevin Corrigan vibes to me in this movie.
A little bit.
You remember this guy?
Yeah, even more handsome. Kevin Corrigan, also handsome man, but Richard Jordan even more handsome.
But there's a sort of a half sleazy, half handsome thing going on, and you're with the hair slicked back and everything. And
this ending I wanted to ask you guys about, not just because it's thematically questionable in the sense of this person who seems unstable suddenly finds the sort of dream situation that she was hoping for, maybe. But
Right.
I think the tension that existed between her and Richard Jordan's character is sort of this like very mature post-nuclear family discussion that they have right after they've had sex,
Very
where they're both
70s, yeah.
Yeah, and then at the end, not even just because it's a betrayal of those values, but it's just kind of nothing. They're just happy because it's nice for them to be happy. And obviously I like these characters, and I'm happy that Dylan has a good ending. She's so cool. But
yeah,
this is a part that sort of left me uncertain about what's being said or what we're supposed to make of this.
I mean, I think the Schrader ending would probably be her crying in the bathtub, cut the credits, right? I mean, it would be the act of self-destruction is how his scripts so often end, especially ones that feature a journaling protagonist.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was happy to see her find a possible way forward, and one that is, they talk about, they talk about being like the Joan Baez to his Bob Dylan or something. And there is a feeling like, they
that's
were
what they wanted to be in college.
Yeah, they were
I
thinking
think,
like radically and like reshaping all these ideas, and that didn't really pan out, but maybe they could come together in a kind of slightly more contemporary family formulation that's still, two people and a kid in a house.
I figured we were going to talk about this ending, so I've been thinking very deeply on it.
Okay, great.
Great.
Since last night. I really I sat very Schrader-esque, sat with my Ovaltine last night and thought deeply about what I thought about the ending. And then I wasn't sure. And then I took a shower this morning, and it came to me in the shower, as most great thoughts do. And what I think what works for me about the ending, which didn't work the first time I watched it, because I was thinking about the film solely from the point of view of Diane, right?
Yeah.
But we cut so many times to Jeff.
It's true.
That I feel like there's these two journeys going here. I kind of diagrammed it in my head when I was in the shower. Her journey is through the past, journey to the past, Neil Young style, right? She's going back.
Yeah.
It's not working for her. It's by the time she's gotten to this final thing, she has fucked her life up. She's
disastrous.
At least one guy's life up. Probably fucked up the mom's life. Who knows? John Houseman regressed all his work, right? Not good. But on the flip side, there's this guy that she's reignited with, and he's gone on a journey towards her, right? And I think what works for me is that she finally ends up with someone who isn't just who she is for him, it's who he is for her. He's made this journey for her. He's cared about her. He is worried about her. And I think that's something that maybe their dynamic didn't have. Even though he was always asking to marry her, he was, I think, asking to marry her in this to be the Joan Baez to his Bob Dylan,
this
right?
fantasy.
Not who she is as a person.
Yep.
And now he knows who she is as a person and still is going towards her. And I think it's not necessarily a traditional happy ending in that everything's going to be sunshine and roses. Like, who knows? But because he made an effort towards her, maybe he'll help balance her out, help her in the journey that she actually needs to do, which is also to who she is, right? That's my take. That's what I came up with in the shower. And
that's really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I like that.
I don't know if that's what she was intending, but that's, I was like, if this is what I took from it on this view. And I like that. I like the idea of, people journeying towards each other, or at least one person towards somebody. Cause I think a successful relationship, at least one of the people has to kind of give a bit more. I know there's always a discussion of a relationship is equal. I don't think that's true. I think it's always a give and a take. Like at one point in a relationship, and you can hear this from most people who've been married for like 40 years, is like, or they broke up eventually, but Jennifer Gardner and Ben Affleck used to talk about how she would work and he would watch the kids, and then he would work and she'd watch the kids, things like that. And it's that give and take. And I think the film kind of shows that he's willing to do the give and take. And the question and the tension at the end is will she?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I do like
yeah.
what I believe is either the very last line or almost the last line, where she doesn't say like everything works out. She says life goes on, which I think is a much more ambiguous, like you're saying, just sort of, if you're going to succeed, you definitely have to recognize that there's this constant evolution. And to his credit, he seems to recognize that, and he's not put off by the fact that she's lied about her husband's suicide or disappeared.
And then he realizes that she's not who she was.
Yeah.
Right.
But
She's a new person.
he's still interested.
Exactly.
It also hurts to see her throw away all her journals, because I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, but at the same time, I always think about like every once in a while, I'm like, I just want to delete the Facebook, right? But then I'm like, my old photos. But I'm like, maybe I should just delete the Facebook. She deleted her journals. Like, I don't know. That was the other thought I had when I watched it last night.
Right.
Like, maybe this is the purge I need.
I mean, as a semi Schrader protagonist, I think, because I was left wondering what the film's sort of position on like self inquiry was, because it's on the one hand, it does seem like, that way lies destruction and ruin, right? Like, sort of traveling inward, trying to figure yourself out is only going to end up hurting you and other people, and kind of keep moving forward is the choice that she ends up with at the end. But I think it might be a little more complicated than that, because, she has to fail. She has to screw up and flame out a little bit. Maybe she didn't have to sleep with Keith Carradine, but like, going on this trip, she, I guess, figured out that there was no solution for her in that direction, which brings her back home where Richard Jordan's found her, right? And like, I think, especially as a film made by a woman who wanted to make a movie about the end of her 13-year marriage, it makes sense that the solution, or the 1979 version of a potentially happy ending, would be, the two of them realizing that maybe if they each moved toward the middle, they could make it work now in a way that they didn't before. And that is like, I think, something that comes out of like second wave feminism that is sustainable and beneficial, is like, realizing that if in a relationship with a woman and a man, like, the man has to pull his weight, like,
it is fascinating that it's coming after an unmarried woman, where she goes kind of on a journey through men, lands with Alan Bates, one of the top 5 hot men from the 70s. DM me, I'll tell you the other 4. Okay. And Keith Carradine's one of those 4. So actually there's 2 right there. But has the same kind of thing where it's like, I'll build a life with you. And she chooses the other side of it. She chooses, I know I gotta figure out who I am.
Right.
And it's interesting to see them back to back and be like, is one a happier situation when he is either even attempting happiness, or are they both, kind of cynical? I don't know. It's because one is very open and the other is very like closed a little bit in terms of moving on. Yeah,
so many new Hollywood, or just the 70s movies from Hollywood, end with a character kind of unsure where to go next, and like, uncertain, unresolved. And I think this finds a way for that to be not totally hopeless. Like, it's not like it's Scarecrow or something, or like what's the Straight Time, it's maybe things could be nice with this nice man and his nice daughter.
And I think, to your point, Jake, it seems to intentionally be resisting any desire to make binary observations about, is self-inquiry good or bad? Because we have the John Belushi character who has clearly engaged in no self-inquiry and has ended up a nightmare, right? So it's not like it's saying that way is necessarily promising, or that this has worked out perfectly well or not, compared to like an unmarried woman for her. Yeah. But I think we know the limitations of second wave feminism in terms of often prioritizing this middle class or upper class white female in like a United States or Western European nation version of existence. But I think, like you're saying, if there are things that it did well, is sort of like give the analytical tools or the openings that could then be applied by other more open-minded people, your Audre Lordes or whatever, to more versions of this, in just saying, hey, this room that people need to maybe find success and a healthier version of the relationship, maybe not find that and decide to go the route of just seeking out by yourself personally forever, right? And that just having the more roads available to a person is just going to lead to more success in the end. And I don't know if you saw, Jake, that I think it's nice that Joan Tewkesbury maybe in the midst of making the film felt one way about it. She went to Directors Fortnight at Cannes, and there was a French, another woman filmmaker who stood up and said, I think this film is shit. Did you just make this because it was like your only chance to direct a film? Yeah. And she said, yes. And now she watched the film at the screening at UCLA, and afterwards she says, it's nice. It's a nice film. I like movie. It. And Ed Pressman, who's in the audience, says, I like it. Now I understand the movie for the first time, and I also like it. So I think that's just to say that even a single perspective on your own text that you made yourself may evolve over time. So
well, she also says, she says to Smukler, thank you for letting me watch my movie. Yeah. Which I think means, both like it speaks to the absolute disservice that's been done to these films by women from the time that are in some cases like literally just like falling apart. But also, I think giving her the opportunity to look back on this movie like an old boyfriend, perhaps, and kind of see where she came from and where she's now. And she directed a number of television films after this, which that's a whole other story. Like the way that especially
lots of filmmakers,
so many of these women from this book end up directing television films, and so much of the subject matter that we might think of as like women's picture type subject matter ends up getting laughed off as like movie of the week kind of stuff, or considered like below what is good enough to put in a theater, because what's good enough to put in a theater is like Dunstan checks in or whatever. But but she has made those movies, and she directs a bunch of television, and she teaches a lot. So like, she hasn't had the career that maybe we would have liked her to have in Hollywood, but she's been a part of the industry in her own way, and she's still around and kicking. Love to Joan Tewkesbury. That's what I say. Yeah.
I think it's definitely a film that is rewarding on multiple watches.
Okay.
Because I've watched it, I think about five times now. I think this was the fifth time I'd watched it.
Well,
because I wrote about it in my newsletter a couple weeks ago, so I actually watched it twice this year.
Nice.
And although I did not go this deep into when I wrote about it in the newsletter,
sure.
But it's definitely one that every time you watch it, there's always something else that you find the connection to. Like, for example, this time at the beginning, I didn't put together that the song she plays is the song that Eric plays for her. And so she's already psychologically messing with him at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. Like they said, I didn't even put that together. Probably I'm like medium advanced dumb or something sometimes. To refine what you're saying. But I think movies like this that are unconventional, they don't fit into a certain genre, they don't fit into an auteur point of view, are the kind of films that you should watch a couple of times before you put any kind of value, whether it is it good, is it bad, or is it how it affects you emotionally. I am a huge advocate. Having seen a bajillion movies, I also have watched several movies a lot, and I'm a a big fan of the revisit. And I specifically love a revisit like 10 years later.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like if you're a patient person, like, to hold off watching a movie and then watch it again 10 years later and you're like, oh, wow. You know, especially if you are, unlike Eric, someone who is actually growing emotionally.
Growing and changing. Yeah.
Because movies like this that are kind of about emotional growth, I think hit differently at different phases as a human. So I'm not surprised that at 70 something or early 80s, her watching that movie 40 years later is going to hit her totally different than when she was 40 and making it, you know.
We got to be Jeffs here. I totally agree.
Yes.
That's absolutely right.
Strive to Jeffness.
Mm-hmm.
I did have, we shouted this out on the Taxi Driver episode. I don't know if this is Schrader or Tewkesbury or Belushi, but just some of the best dumb guy, like meaningless dialogue in the film where he says, Elvis, the king. What can you say about him? I guess he said it all for all of us. And
really good.
Sometimes,
good fake deep right there.
Yes.
As a man watching movies by women depicting men is often very illuminating of what we're like and how we might strive to not be like that anymore. Mm-hmm. So we got to do a quick sexual obsession check-in now. Mariah, don't get scared. This is for is it
you need the remaining 3 hot men from the 70s?
No, but that could be helpful. We'll ask afterward. So Schrader recently said of a film he's working on, he said the following. This was like a couple months ago. He said this.
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's the one I'm doing now.
So on this show, we are working to determine if he has ever written a movie that's not about sexual obsession. And so we're just checking in here. I think this movie deals with some sexual obsessions. I don't know if it's explicitly about them, but there is sexual obsession is present in the film.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. What do you think, Maria?
Yeah.
All right.
It definitely is.
So Paul,
like,
you've lost.
She's definitely with each man dealing with her trauma through sex. Mm-hmm. So like, I don't know.
All right. Another point for us. No points for Paul.
Maybe one day.
Very strange.
Is this O Canada that's about sexual obsession?
No, it's the one he's working on after that.
This is a new film. Yeah.
He does have, he wrote a script that was optioned by Elizabeth Moss that I haven't heard anything about since that announcement, but it is another film where he wrote it and he felt that it needed a feminine perspective in the director's chair. So she may be directing it. I'm very excited to see that if it ever comes out, but we might have old boyfriends too, young boyfriends coming our way soon. I guess that's about it for us. Thanks so much again to Mariah Gates for joining us. An absolute treat. Where can folks find what you're working on and tell us about the book?
Yeah, I'm pretty much old films Flickr everywhere. So Tumblr, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Instagram, Threads, Substack, probably some other places that I'm forgetting that I created. Blue Sky, I think. Lots of places. So there's an old YouTube channel if you want to yell at me for my old video reviews.
You got like 13 years of solid material up on the internet.
One of the most prolific posters of all time. Just truly incredible.
You know, growing up in the middle of nowhere, I started getting on the internet when I was 12 in the 90s, and it was a different internet then. I mostly looked at Garfield comics back in those days, but I had a lot of Yahoo groups. I actually wrote about some Yahoo group drama for Nerdist a couple of years ago relating to the implosion of an Ewan McGregor Yahoo group. So if you're interested in that, you can Google it and find it.
I will be checking that out right now.
But the book hopefully will be out in spring of next year. I'm in the middle of the whole putting the photos together and the interviews are done. Filmmakers are looking and making sure they're happy with what they said. I think it's a pretty unique mixture of women sort of interconnected in ways that I didn't realize. Much like a filmmaker, you work on a project and you don't really see the connections until you're putting it together, and then you're like, oh wow, these women all have interesting like voices talking to each other, even if they don't know they're talking to each other. So I hope people will enjoy it. It's been like 3 years of my life. It'll be like 4 years by the time it comes out.
Wow.
I don't ever want to make another book, but I probably, my agent will be like, make another book. So
you'll pass enough time, you'll forget how painful it was.
I'll forget how horrible it was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all horrible. It's actually really fun. I love talking to people, obviously. We just talked for 3 hours. I love talking to people. That part is easy. The rest of it is hard and horrible.
Yeah.
And but it'll be worth it when I have like a little pink book coming out. It should be pink, hopefully.
Oh, nice.
My power color.
Like the old boyfriend's poster.
Yeah. My website during A Year with Women, I changed it specifically to hot pink because I wanted people to take hot pink seriously.
Great. Great.
I think they did. I don't
you
know.
were
We'll
ahead
see.
of the curve with the whole Barbie thing. So
yeah. Well, hot pink is a cool color. In my opinion, it is a neutral, much like black and white. It's black, white, hot pink, and leopard print. Those are all neutrals.
Yeah, they go together.
Or any animal print, really. So hopefully that'll be out then. I'm planning to go on whatever book tour I can afford to whatever cities where I have friends who can let me sleep on their floor, basically. But until then, I have my monthly column at rogerebert.com where I talk to a female director every month. This most recent one was Alice Roacher for La Chimera.
Oh,
and next
excited to see that
in May, it's going to be the director of Slow, which is a Lithuanian film. She won Best International Director for Best International World Cinema. I think that's what they call it at Sundance last year, but the film is finally coming up this year.
Cool.
It's really beautiful romantic film where one of the characters is asexual, which is not something you often see in a romantic film, let alone any film.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful film. So that's coming out. And as you probably can tell, I'm just always on the internet. So there's a lot. Oh, for Schrader fans, I spoke to Patricia Rozema, a great Canadian filmmaker, and she tells a story about Paul Schrader in the interview. So they're both
Sweet.
Dutch Calvinists. So.
Oh, wow.
Okay, we will have to check this out.
Yeah.
Well, Marya, you're doing the work of like 150 people somehow,
Correct.
and we really appreciate it.
Know.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a real treat. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Ian, any last words?
No,
I
do
am
you want to
threatening
do the thing? Okay, great. Finally.
What thing? The thing remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. Helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, call your old boyfriend about it. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcasty for me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Paul Schrader podcast, you can email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. All that is at podcastyforme.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. And next week, join us for American Gigolo, which is how you pronounce it. I looked it up.
I actually have a Paul Schrader American Gigolo story. Can I share it real
please.
quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so I saw it on 35 millimeter at, I think it was UCLA. I don't remember. This is 2023, I want to say. So I guess is that the 40th, 30th? I can't do math. But whatever anniversary that is.
40th, yeah.
Yep.
And I had brought my $1 vinyl American Gigolo record. Brought it to work with me because I was going straight from work to the screening. And after the movie was over, he was just there. So I was like, "Hey, Mr. Schrader, I love this movie. Will you sign my vinyl?" And he signed it, but then he looked at me and he was just like, "Why do you have this?" And I was like, currently right now? Or like, why do I have this vinyl? I have many, I don't know what he meant by that, but I cherish that signature. I cherish that moment. And I cherish American Gigolo, so I'm excited to listen to that episode when it drops as
Awesome.
well.
Thank you. I mean, how disappointed would you be if he was just like a normal, nice person, right? That's not what you want at all.
You know, it was a perfect Schrader
you want a little
interaction,
prickly, weird. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
So the man lives up to the reputation. All right. With that, thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.